ನಮಸ್ತೆ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರೆ, ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಹಿಸ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ, ಇತಿಹಾಸ ದರ್ಪಣ ಹಾಗೂ ಋತುಮಾನ.com ಸಂಯುಕ್ತ ಆಶ್ರಯದಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೀತಾ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಅರಿವಿನ ನಿರಿಗೆ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಸರಣಿಯ 23ನೇ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಕ್ಕೆ ತಮ್ಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ನಡುವೆ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ರಂಜಿತಾ ದತ್ತಾ ಅವರು. ಅವರ ಪರಿಚಯವನ್ನ ನಾನು ಈಗ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ದೇನೆ. Professor Ranjeeta Datta teaches at Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Her areas of interest are history of religion and ideas of religion and specialities in medieval and early modern India. She has been a fellow at Max Weber College, University of Erfurt, Germany on January-September 2020. And has been a fellow at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, on 2009 to 2011. Her publications, in addition to essays in journals and edited volumes, include a monograph from hagiographies to biographies, Ramanuja in Tradition and History, that is published through Oxford University, India, on 2014. An edited special issue of Summer Hill titled Regions, Identities and Entangled Geographies, that is published through IIAS Shimla on October 2008, and a co-edited volume titled Negotiating Religion, that is published through Perspectives from Indian, that is published through Manohar Publication, New Delhi. That is titled as Negotiating Religion, Perspectives from Indian History on 2012. So this is the very short and sweet introduction of Professor Ranjeeta Datta. Currently she is working in JNU, and I welcome Professor Ranjeeta Datta on behalf of Bengaluru Historian Society, Itihasa Darpana and ऋतुमाना.com. And I also welcome her on behalf of the august audience who gathered here as audience. So welcome, madam. Welcome for the talk.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pradeep. I thank the organizers of this webinar, Professor Aruni, Dr. Pradeep, Bangalore Historical Society, Itihasa Darpan and ऋतुमाना.com for inviting me to speak here. Many years ago, when I was researching for my PhD on the Srivaishnava community in medieval and early modern India, I would be visiting Mysore pretty often, and I would be going to the epigraphic library out there. And in one of my visits, I happened to meet someone who told me that, I must visit Professor B.R. Gopal. Now, I don't know whether any one of you in the audience would remember who Professor B.R. Gopal was. He was a great epigraphist, and he also wrote this very wonderful book called, Sri Ramanuja in Karnataka. I had read his book, in Delhi, but the fact that I was supposed to go and meet him didn't strike me. So, often when you are a young scholar, enthusiasm prevails upon courtesy and formalities. So without any delay and hesitation, I just landed up at the doorstep of his house, which was in 1997. He was very ill at that time. And I have to say that his family was extremely welcoming, and so was he. And despite his frail voice, Professor Gopal conversed with me quite a lot. He was very passionate about his subject, and it seemed he's one of the few who worked on the link between Ramanuja and the Srivaishnava tradition in Karnataka. We have, of course, R. Vasanta's book on Narayana Swami temple at Melkote, and few others. We have Anila Verghese, who has worked on the Sri Vaishnava, who has a very wonderful section on Sri Vaishnava tradition under the Vijayanagar period, and of course, Aladalla Pekola. But Gopal's book was a very good book in the sense that it tried to explain through epigraphy, through inscriptions, about the influence of Ramanuja in the Karnataka region. And it was a very nice interaction. And alas, in 1998, he passed away, and left quite a bit of a void of scholars who don't claim for international fame, who work sincerely, who work with their sources. And what I felt after reading his book and other books of this kind is that there is a difference between the textual information that we get and the epigraphical information. And if we are true to our sources and do not superimpose our modern worldviews on them, then we will be able to arrive at findings which can confuse us, which can trouble us. After all, ambiguity is a very important part of creativity also. But it will also transform our vision of history, because instead of looking at things in black and white, we then get a picture which, is somewhere in between. So it is with these ideas in mind that I approach my conversation today. And you know uh, I'm sorry, my slide is not moving. Oh, okay, yeah, I can see that, sorry. Yeah, it is, and I would be talking about Ramanuja's visit to Karnataka, and what was, and how does one analyze this visit. I deliberately use the visit here because there is a controversy over the fact that whether he visited out of his will or whether he was forced to come here because of a persecution of the Chola ruler. Now, I would be reading in part, I would be also, sort of speaking extempo. So it would be a bit of a mix. Now, I first begin by introducing my, theme. Is so here, as a part of my introduction, the question that comes to my mind is that how do we understand a religious tradition that cuts across regions, has a pan-regional, and in this case, a pan-Indian, sacred geography and religious identity? Do we analyze it as a unified, seamless, undifferentiated tradition that is articulated uniformly, irrespective of, regional, I put regional in quotes, social and political differences? Were these just mere variants, again in quotes, that manifested and attributed a difference? Now, here the religious tradition under discussion is Sri Vaishnavism, and it kind of spread not only in South India, but it also left its imprint in the northern part of India, especially in regions like Vrindavan, where today also you find, festivals, being celebrated. You have an Andal temple out there, and you have, several linkages between the devotees at Vrindavan and the devotees in the southern region. Now, who are the Sri Vaishnavas? Just, as an introduction. Now, they are a distinct Vaishnava community in South India. Confined primarily to the present day Tamil Nadu, southern parts of the present day Andhra and Karnataka. The community considers Vishnu and his consort Lakshmi as their supreme god, accept Ramanuja as its most important religious and spiritual leader, and they regard the Sanskrit Vedas as well as a collection of 4,000 Tamil hymns written by, not written, I'm sorry, composed by Alvars, who were early Vaishnava saints, as its main scriptures. Now, these collection of 4,000 hymns were called Nalaira Divya Prabandham. Now, Shri in Sri Vaishnavism actually has two meanings. One, it is an honorary prefix, which sets the community apart from other religious tradition. Two, it denotes an important exegetical concept, that is the role of Shri or Lakshmi as a mediatrix between Vishnu and his devotees. And it is believed that by helping surrender to God, Shri also enhances the accessibility of the God. Now, the present day, the present day Sri Vaishnavas are divided into two main sects. the Vadagalais and the Tengalais. The Vadagalais present the Sanskrit tradition. They give, preference to Sanskrit Vedas over the Dravida Vedas. The Nalaira Divya Prabandham or the Tamil hymns of the Alvas are also called Dravida Vedas and are considered to be more Brahmanical and conservative in their outlook. Kanchipuram in Tamil Nadu is their institutional center, and Vedanta Deshika is supposed to be their spiritual preceptor. Vedanta Deshika was around 14th century, and he's considered to be directly in line of Ramanuja's lineage. Now, the Tengalais, on the other hand, represent the Tamil tradition. They regard the Dravida Vedas, as their scriptures, and therefore they're considered to be more broad-based and less Brahminical, and have a large, non-Brahminic following. Srirangam in Tamil Nadu is their center, and Manaval Mamuni, again late 14th century, was, their religious leader, who also is considered to be the disciple of Ramanuja. Now, today, the entire Sri Vaishnava tradition, its texts and institutional structures, that is the temples and the mathas, are aligned, with either the Vadagalai or the Tengalai. However, both, despite these sectarian identities, acknowledge, Ramanuja, of course, as their, leader, as their guru, and recognize themselves as the Sri Vaishnavas. Now, Ramanuja, more popularly known for his philosophy of Vishishtadvaita, you know, uh, was born around 1017, that is 17 AD. Now, this is a traditional, date to a Brahmin family in Sri Perumbudur. And when we read about Ramanuja, we get to know that it was erudite family to which he was born to, and his father was, of course, a very well-known scholar, Keshavacharya Somaji. Now, Ramanuja spent his early years in Kanchipuram, which was a very important trading and a religious center. His later years were spent in Srirangam, which was at that point of time an emerging urban center with a rich rural hinterland. And Srirangam, as you would all know, is located in Tiruchirappalli district in Tamil Nadu. All right. Now, it is here he died in 1137 AD, again, a traditional date, at the age of 120 years. A very long life he's supposed to have led. Now, we must remember that there is no autobiographical references in Ramanuja's works. When you read his works, he does not talk about himself. He does not even refer to himself. His works were written in Sanskrit. They mainly were commentaries on the Vedas, on the Upanishads, his famous magnum opus Sri Bhashya, on the Gita, Gita Bhashya, and other works which were metaphysics on religion, existence, and salvation. Now, however, whatever we know about Ramanuja, about his life, about his activities, we know it only from the hagiographies or Guru Paramparas, of the Sri Vaishnava tradition, and of course, other poetic compositions like the stotras and the tanyans. Stotras and tanyans are usually, verses in praise and are sung or recited almost every day in a Sri Vaishnava household. Now, on the basis of Ramanuja's work, it can be concluded that he was formulating a coherent, philosophy and was engaged in constant dialogue with the Advaita philosophy of Shankaracharya, whose subsequent followers were actually the ones who were in touch with Ramanuja, because Shankara lived almost 3 centuries or 2.5 centuries before him, which is 8th century. Now, so there was no contact between Shankara and Ramanuja. So when you read Ramanuja's works, it's very clearly attack, or let us say, dissent or argument with the Advaita philosophy. So it's very clearly that the followers of Shankara would be the ones with whom Ramanuja would be interacting. So there must have been an environment of debates, discussions, circulations, diffusion of ideas, a strong intellectual tradition of which Ramanuja was a part of. Interestingly, Ramanuja's ideas, which are called Vishishtadvaita, were actually, it was called Vishishtadvaita much after him. All right. It is actually in Sarvadarshana Vedanta Sangraha that, we find this word coming, this term coming again and again. But before that, also, it would have, come across, though I'm not aware of it, but I would like to stand corrected if it has been. Now, often, the introduction to the study of Vaishnavism in Karnataka is through Ramanuja's visit, namely the southern part of Karnataka, and his efforts at establishing the Sri Vaishnava tradition there through the spread of ideas, debates with other religious traditions, namely the Jainas, and the reconsecration of, a form of Vishnu called Narayana Swami, and the revival of the institutional structure of Narayana Swami temple at Melkote. Now, it is important to remember that Melkote and the temple there, that is the Narayana Swami temple, was never a part of the 108 Divya Desas, which are actually the pilgrimage places of the Sri Vaishnavas. Now, this 108 comprise various, holy places which the Sri Vaishnavas consider holy. So it's a kind of a sacred geography for them, and this was articulated in a consolidated way in the hymns of the Arvars. Now, it is only in the hagiographies or Guru Paramparas from 13th century onwards, that is 100 years after Ramanuja, that Karnataka region with Melkote is visible in the context of Ramanuja's visit there. What we must then remember, and is that, are we then trying to assume that this region, that is the southern part of Karnataka mainly, was a clean slate where the Vaishnava traditions were concerned? And it is only with Ramanuja's advent and stay that a Sampradaya or a Vaishnava tradition developed? Are we to assume that? If we realize that there has been a pre-existing strong Vaishnava tradition there, then wouldn't there have been any interaction between the older tradition and the newer ones which were coming along with Ramanuja? And I think there would have been an interaction, because when we read the story of Ramanuja reaching Melkote, the explanation given there is that it was already a pre-existing site which had fallen into disuse according to the hagiographies, and Ramanuja revived that place. We don't know, that what would have been the situation in this area before Ramanuja came. There are several works, and of course, this region belonged to the Hoysalas. There are several works which, talk about the Hoysala territory here, but we are only aware of the Jaina, tradition persisting, but not much about the Vaishnava tradition. Though in other parts of Karnataka region, we do come across various ideas about the Vaishnava religion. Now, Ramanuja is supposed to have visited, actually, he went along Kaveri, and then he, came to a place called Mithila Shaligrama. These two are still villages in contemporary Karnataka. I think it's called Mirle, I'm not too sure. And then from there, he went to, Tondanur, which was probably the capital or the outpost of capital of the Hoysalas. And then from there, he went to Melkote. And then from Melkote, he came back to Srirangam. So he actually started from Srirangam, went along Kaveri, went to Ramanathapuram. From there, he came to these two villages, Mithila and Shaligrama. And from there, he went to Tondanur. And from Tondanur, he went ahead to Melkote and then back to Srirangam. And he's supposed to have, this trip of his was actually for 12 years. Now, what I argue is that the Sri Vaishnava tradition is not a pre-given, eternally fixed, frame. Rather, it is a process, a tradition which is in making. And this one can make out if one reads the narratives, in the hagiographies, which are, and these narratives, they legitimize the various processes, the various points in the life of a saint through certain stories, through certain tropes. And these are then disseminated. And the extent of the dissemination can be found from the inscriptions and the Sthala Puranas, which are, of course, the temple texts. So, in this particular presentation, I've actually tried to take the three together, and bring forward, a certain kind of an integrated view about what, actually happened. Uh, Rather than what actually happened, what are the possibilities, with which, as a historian of 21st century, we can look and study the Ramanuja tradition in Karnataka. So there are rituals, there are festivals in the public arena of the temple, of the court, and the mathas, which are, of course, very well known. And we find that, despite the fact Srirangam and Kanchipuram in Tamil region were epicenters, the Karnataka and the Andhra region had a significant presence, in the Srivaishnava tradition, which should, which we have to look beyond, the travels, the journeys of the various religious figures like Ramanuja in a larger historical context. And it is this that attributed, dynamism to the tradition. It's not that it makes the tradition, disunited or, separate, but, any religious tradition has various, important components and various important substructures within it, which actually talk of differential influences, various negotiations and various groups who also become gradually powerful. Now, starting, from the 13th century, now I come to my, the section on where I would introduce you to the hagiographical narratives. And I would like to analyze these hagiographical narratives in conjunction with the inscriptions and the Sthala Puranas. So these hagiographies or the Guru Paramparas, actually the accounts began to be composed in the 13th century. In my opinion, Divyasiri Charitam is one of the earliest ones in the 13th century, followed by Yatiraja Vaibhavam. Then you have Arairapadi, which was 14th, late 13th, 14th, and so is Mumairapadi. Jatindra Pravanna Prabhavam is a later period, and Prapanna Amritam is, of course, 17th century. And the translation of Prapanna Amritam is actually in a fantastic book which has come out from Ramakrishna Matha, Ramakrishna Mission, sorry, long, many back ago, which is called Sri Ramanuja. It's one of the best books which, an organization like this can produce, very well written and very coherent book. Now, what happens is that there are, as I said, there are no autobiographical accounts which are left by Ramanuja. So we have to depend on these hagiographies. Now, roughly speaking, there are four, narratives, or let us say five, themes that are in this narrative. One is, of course, Ramanuja fleeing Srirangam. Second is that he's arriving at Mithila Shaligram. Then he arrives at Tundanur or Tundanur. And then he's visiting Melkote Narayana Swami temple. And of course, he is back to Srirangam. That is how, we look at the entire thing. Now, the thing is that when we are talking about Ramanuja fleeing Srirangam, what do we mean by it? Now, the hagiographical narratives tell us. I was talking about the first, first part of the narrative about him trying to, trying to leave, Srirangam. Now, the story that we are told is that the Chola ruler, compelled, everybody to sign on the palm leaf on which it was written that Shiva is the greatest of all the gods. That is, nobody is greater than Shiva. Now, he was, of course, advised by his courtiers that Ramanuja's signature would be the most important. Otherwise, this entire exercise would be futile. So with the result, what happens is that the soldiers actually go to Ramanuja's house, and they of course try to try to imprison Ramanuja. Now, one of the disciples of Ramanuja, of course, got to know about it, and the name was Kuratalwan, and he quickly wore Ramanuja's clothes, and that was the time when Ramanuja was bathing, and he posed as Ramanuja and left with the soldiers. In the meantime, another, of his senior disciples, Periyanambi, along with Ramanuja, fled from Srirangam, and of course they arrived, at the Hoysala kingdom in the Karnataka region. Now, thereafter, the hagiographies describe at length, Ramanuja's sojourn in this region and the establishment of the Narayana Swami temple at Melkote. Now, the first interaction of his is actually with the Hoysala king, Vitthal Devaraya. And the story goes here as follows. Today, I would be, telling you people a lot of stories. So just to kind of hopefully make your evening a little more livelier. So the narrative goes as follows. Now, the Hoysala king, Vitthal Devaraya, a Jain, was unhappy that his daughter was afflicted by a spirit, which is Pishach, and nobody could cure her. Tondanu Nambi informed the king that his guru Ramanuja was there and advised the king that the latter should beseech Ramanuja's help. Now, Tondanu Nambi was one of the few lone Srivaishnavas who lived in this part. Then Tondanu Nambi recounted the Brahma Rakshasa episode. Now, this Brahma Rakshasa episode is an episode where one of the rulers in the Tamil region, his daughter was possessed by a Brahma Rakshasa, and nobody could, cure the daughter. Whereas Ramanuja was able to do it, because when Ramanuja went to meet the daughter, there was a ideological, or there was a polemical debate between Brahma Rakshasa and Ramanuja, in which Ramanuja won and Brahma Rakshasa fled. Now, Vitthal Deva Raya, of course, promised, Vitthal Deva, the Hoysala ruler, promised that if Ramanuja cured his daughter, he would submit to Ramanuja forever. Now, after much persuasion on the part of Tondanu Nambi, Ramanuja finally came to the Hoysala court. Now, the princess, that is the daughter, was given Ramanuja's, Shripad Tirtha, which is the water after washing the feet. Now, after drinking it, she was cured and she fell at Ramanuja's feet, followed by her father. Then we are told that Ramanuja renamed the Hoysala king as Vishnu Vardhana Raya. Meanwhile, the priests of the king, who were actually Jains, that is the 12,000 Shravanas, that's a number which we are given, were agitated, and they challenged Ramanuja to prove his merit in a debate. Now, Ramanuja agreed to do so. He went to the mandapa behind a screen, and like a Adishesha with 1,000 tongues, answered all their questions and stunned them. Thereafter, Ramanuja made them grind the stone mill. Some of them changed and submitted to him. And that is where the narrative, ends. Now, when we look at the inscriptions, inscriptions talk about the fact that he did come to, Mithila and Shaligrama. It's very, very evident. In fact, in the 13th century, this area was consecrated and rituals were started, and there is a Narasimha temple in this region. Whereas in the hagiographical narratives, this part is not discussed at all. Now, we find that the story of the Chola ruler persecuting Ramanuja, and Ramanuja's departure, rather he's fleeing from that place and being in exile, in the Karnataka region, has acquired a lot of proportion, a lot of fame, popularity. But why were the hagiographies, writing this narrative? Now, there are clearly larger reasons. Now, the story of the persecution, was actually replete with sectarian overtones. In this story, the hagiographers are very clearly critical of the Chola ruler's high-handedness, who was a Shaiva, and hence he was supposed to be, a person of an evil temperament. There is a lot of animosity against the Jains, which also comes across in this, entire episode. And there is a constant attempt to prove that Sri Vaishnava religion is superior. And of course, the fact is that there is an unflinching devotion towards one guru at the cost of self-sacrifice. Because the disciple, Kuratal one, who posed as Ramanuja, who went and in the disguise to the Chola court, was actually eventually blinded. And Periyan Nambi, the senior disciple, also had to face a lot of problems. Now, so there is a clear demonization of the enemies who belong to the other religious traditions. And finally, we are told that the Chola ruler was struck with a dreaded disease, and where he had worms in his throat. Hence, he's called Krimikant Chola. And he met with a cruel end. Now, interestingly, while describing the persecution of one religious community by the other, which had a political support, the fact is that there was an attempt, through these narratives, to tell the rulers or the ruling groups that that the Sri Vaishnava tradition was superior, was better, and hence patronage should be extended to them. And then why the Karnataka region? Because it's not there otherwise. In the 108 Divya Desas, we don't find Melkote or Tundanur, any of these places figuring. But it becomes a very important place, later on. So why the Karnataka region? Now, we must remember that in the 13th century, the Hoysalas had actually made inroads, into the Tamil region. They had come as close as as close as Kannur, near Sri Rangam, and they also made a lot of benefactions at Sri Rangam. This was, of course, after the decline of the Cholas. So clearly, the Hoysalas were very, very important, in the South Indian politics at this point of time, in this entire peninsular region. Kakatiyas had also, who were during this period, had also come, but they weren't that active. It was mainly the Hoysalas and the Pandyas. Now, clearly, winning the patronage of the Hoysalas becomes very crucial for the hagiographers. And it's very evident that even if we don't know, but the hagiographers were very, very aware of the fact that there is a pre-existing Vaishnava tradition in these regions, which should be actually incorporated and made a part of the Sri Vaishnava tradition. So this kind of a narrative, actually was, helpful in projecting the influence, of the Sri Vaishnavas in the Karnataka region. And the entry point became Ramanuja, who was a very important leader, and it gave a lot of, and Ramanuja's connections gave a lot of legitimacy, to the, to the tradition during this period, and hence patronage from the Hoysala rulers. So while in the 13th and the 14th, or maybe 12th and the 13th, we have actually, the Hoysalas, and being wooed by the Sri Vaishnava tradition, it's very obvious that the conversion of the Hoysala ruler and the defeat of the Jains, are something which a large number of hagiographical narratives mention, but all do not mention. Divya Suri Charitam, which is the first, first text, does not mention this. So the persecution of the Jains is recounted as a symbolic depiction of the spread and expansion of the community network, and to look for fresh avenues, of the patronage. Now, it needs to be emphasized that perhaps no other theme received such an exhaustive treatment in the hagiographies, than the theme of sectarianism, whether it was against the Shaivas, whether it was against the Advaitins, or whether it was against the Jains. And the final result of all these narratives of sectarianism was actually the victory of the Srivaishnavas, the victory superiority of Ramanuja, and of course, a certain kind of a, establishment of their moral authority. Now, these hagiographies, were actually probably not only building up strategies to compete with other religious traditions and their, over patronage and disciples, but they were also trying to attract respective followers, to deflect from their original faith. So you see, for the for by showing that Ramanuja was here in Tundanur, Melkote, and he was able to, assert his authority, his superiority and moral authority, the hagiographies in the 13th, 14th, and in the subsequent centuries are also trying to tell the people who live in this area that, please, adopt, our religious tradition. It has a very great history. So in this context, the delineation of Ramanuja as an exceptional leader becomes, very, very crucial. Now, while we, talk about the fact that this is, of course, his persecution, his arriving at Mithila Shaligram, and then finally at Tundanur, where he's converting the Hoysala ruler, the fourth theme, which is mentioned, which I've kind of listed here, is actually his establishment of, the Narayan Swami temple at Melkote, and also, sort of taking and also re-establishing a very important tradition which finds resonance even till today, which has to do with Bibi Nachiyar or Tulaka Nachiyar. Now, we have, our hagiographies. Again, we go back to, our hagiographies. And in the hagiographies, we are told that, Ramanuja, in his dream, while he was at Tundanur, he has a dream that that there is that Vishnu is lying in a tank or in a lake near Yadavagiri, which is of course Melkote. All right, and Vishnu tells him that you please come and recover me from here. I'm in the form of Narayana. Take me up to the hill at Yadavagiri and re-establish me there. So so the recovery of the idol, of Narayana from the lake, is of course a very, very important landmark in of Ramanuja's visit in this temple. Now we find that here, of course, Ramanuja, goes to the lake. He recovers the, the idol, and then he climbs up Yadavagiri, which was actually, and when he reaches the temple, he just sees the temple in ruins, and he wonders what it is. There's a huge anthill, and so with the help of various, people, he's able to, dig up the anthill, and of course is able to, sort of recover, the ruins of the temple and reinstalls the idol there. And he also, of course, kind of reinstalls the festivals. Now, however, in his dream, what actually comes is this, and God comes in his dream and says that, look, this is incomplete. Your job is incomplete because my Utsava Murti is missing. What kind of festivals are you holding without my Utsava Murti? And when Ramanuja in the dream asks, where is your Utsava Murti? He's told that, it is lying in Delhi. It was taken in one of the raids by the Delhi Sultan, and, and it is lying there neglected in the treasury. Now, the story here becomes very interesting more so because, of the way we, way we look at the story, is that the Ramanuja, along with the Vaishnava disciples, crosses a lot of, he faces a lot of physical difficulties and reaches Delhi, and, recover and reaches Delhi, and he goes to the Delhi Sultan and tells him that, look, my God is here. So the Delhi Sultan says, I don't know who he is. You can go to my treasury and take a look. Now, which of course Ramanuja does. And when he reaches there, he doesn't find, the idol there. He comes back and tells, the king. The king says, I'm sorry, but I don't know, what you're talking about. Now, while, he was sleeping in Delhi at that point of time, he has a dream where the Lord says that I am there, I'm very much here, but I am a plaything, I am a toy, I'm a doll, and I am of the princess, of the Nachiyar, and I'm in her bedchamber. So Ramanuja next day goes and tells the king that, the Sultan, that is, it's your daughter has it, and she is, using it as sort of a plaything. Now, so the Sultan says, fine, you take it from my daughter's bedchamber, which Ramanuja does. And with his followers, he quickly leaves the place. Now, when the princess discovers that, she that Utsava Murti, which is Selva Priya, is missing. Of course, there is another story that when, Ramanuja enters the bedchamber, the Murti walks up to him and sits on Ramanuja's lap, and Ramanuja says, my Selva Priya, that is my little boy, and then takes him with him and goes away. Now, the princess actually used to treat, Selva Priya or the Utsava Murti as her husband. She was immersed in the bhakti of the god. So during the day, he was her god, and at night he became her husband. Now, when she finds out, that the Utsava Murti is missing, she is delirious. She just can't get over it, and pining for her, husband, she actually, follows the entire troop. And quickly they reach Melkote, and of course they install, this is the temple at Melkote, which is on a hill. This is of course from the hill, and this is of course the Bibi Nachiyar. So they quickly, they go there and they install, the Utsava Murti. And when the princess reaches there, she actually merges, with the god. And this is the image which is there today even at Melkote. And this is the Bibi Nachiyar story. Now, interestingly, this Bibi Nachiyar story is not only narrated to us by the hagiographers where Melkote is concerned. It is there in the Sthala Puranas of Melkote temple, Narayana Swami temple. It also became a theme of a very important work in the 18th century, which is called Varanandi Kalyana, which was, of course, written by Cheluvamba, who was the wife of Krishnadeva Vodeyar, who ruled Mysore from roughly 1713 to 1731 AD. But that is not it. We also find the same Bibi Nachiyar story without any reference to Melkote in in Koilolugu at Srirangam, where it is the Bibi Nachiyar who's at Srirangam, and Ramanuja is at Srirangam, and from Srirangam he goes to Delhi to recover the idol. We find it being mentioned in Tirupati also, and in Vandiyur. But none of these narratives in these places make any reference to Melkote or Tirunarayanapuram, as it has been called in the hagiographies. It is only in the Guru Paramparas that we find, very clear-cut reference to Melkote or to, in the hagiographies. Now, the question then that arises is that, what are we seeing here? In my opinion, the Melkote tradition of Bibi Nachiyar is the first one, and it is there. And it had an impact, or it became popular for various reasons, which I'll be discussing in a short while. It also proved Ramanuja's, moral authority, that he could, bring back festival idols, establish them, and of course, begin with festivals. It actually proved that he had immense organization capability, and a glorification of a leader is very important for a community because it gives community a legitimacy in an environment when there were other religious communities competing for patronage from power groups and patronage, and of course, for followers. So so in my opinion, probably the story had an impact, and there was a certain kind of a, of a resonance this legend had where Melkote and the spread of Srivaishnavism in this region is concerned. So clearly the latter, hagiographers, now if you read Yatindra Pravarna Pravabham, if you read Prapanda Amritam, they make slight references, but the local temple records like Koil Olugu or the Sthala Purana at Tirupati and Vandiyur, they, talk about this. So clearly this is a way, this legend was borrowed, this trope was borrowed in order to, elevate the status of their site, in the entire Sri Vaishnava tradition, and of course, attract as many, followers as possible. Now, we must remember that this legend of Bibi Nachiyar or Tulaka Nachiyar. Tulaka is Turkish. It's actually Muslims also nowadays. Nachiyar is definitely very crucial, because where the hagiographies or where the Guru Paramparas is concerned, they seem to have incorporated this tradition from the local traditions in this place. Now, why am I saying this is something which I'll be just talking about, just now. You know, the process of deification of Tulaka Nachiyar, appeared, in this area in Melkote, which was not only an area of circulation of Ramanuja and the various Sri Vaishnava myths, but it also became a very important part of the Sri Vaishnava pilgrimage network beyond 108, and the religious prominence of this place corresponded with the emergence, of this particular place as a center of power, agriculture, and trade, with a complex network of, institutions. Please remember that Parakala Mutt, this time the Brahmatantra Parakala's Mutt around 14th century, is also making its entry into this region, and is trying to find roots out here. So we find that so this area had actually acquired a huge amount of importance, particularly in the Vijayanagar period, when the Nayakas, also dominated this area. It was also very important trading region also during this period. Now we find that in the origin myths or in the local tradition of Melkote, there is a reference to this kind of a story in the local tradition, which is, of course, the oral tradition. All right. The emergence of Melkote, as an important center, is, of course, dated to 12th century, when under the patronage of the Hoysalas, Tonur, one of the provincial capitals, situated at the southern foothills of Melkote, became very prominent Vaishnava center. Now, with the Hoysala occupation of the Kaveri Delta, Tonur was linked to the Tamil region, and there was frequent political and religious interaction between the Tamil and the Karnataka region. Now with the sack of the Hoysala capital at Dwar Samudra, around 14th century by Malik Kafur, who was the general of Alauddin Khalji, the Sultan of Delhi, the Hoysala ruler Balal III, he shifted his capital to Tonur. So consequently, this area became very, very important. It became very politically important. Now, when it becomes politically important, it also has a certain prehistory of economic importance. All right. So it was a prosperous hinterland. It was located very strategically amongst the hills and rocky areas, and there was a very flourishing trade. Now, this is a background to when the Vijayanagar rulers come in. So with the establishment of the Vijayanagar Empire in the 14th century, the Nayakas, the Kannada Nayakas, emerged as prominent patrons of the Narayan Swami temple. And when you look at the inscriptions, you find most of the donations, the benefactions which are being made are by the Nayakas themselves. All right. Now, this is very important for us because it is in this period, 14th century, that we find the hagiographies or the Guru Paramparas referring to the Bibi Nachiyar tradition in great detail. Now, this coincided. You have the narratives coming up, you have the Vijayanagar kingdom being established with the Nayakas becoming powerful here. Now, this, the third corresponding development which was taking place was the inclusion of the non-Brahmana warrior communities of the area, of that particular area, the traders, the pastoral tribes, into the Sri Vaishnava tradition. This becomes very clear when we look at the inscriptions. There are rituals which have got suddenly, which have numerous, they have expanded, and all the non-Brahmana warrior groups are kind of coming in, they're making donations, and they're participating very actively in the rituals. Now, we find also that 14th century is a period when the acharyas from Melkote were also exercising tremendous influence in the entire Sri Vaishnava tradition. So Melkote in many ways was the first center outside the Tamil region to emerge as an important Sri Vaishnava center. Now goddess, as I said, when we look at the oral tradition, is a part of the folk tradition at Melkote. And in that folk tradition, she is very clearly identified as a Muslim. All right. Now, this identity has to be, or this kind of a depiction of the goddess has to be understood within the context of the demographic and the religious pattern in this area. Melkote, as I've mentioned, was a hilly area. It was inhabited primarily by the warrior communities. Now, since most of the politically important martial groups belonged to these regions, the goddess cults and male warrior divinities dominated the religious beliefs of the people. Now, at both levels, that is, the Muslim devotional traditions, whose social base comprised the local as well as the migrant warrior groups, found a viable means of forging cultic relationships. And we see a large number of Muslim warrior groups, particularly the Rajputs and the Pathans, also gradually migrating through the Deccan into this area. So what happens is that marriage, kinship, and occupational affinities in the mythical narratives, they become the mechanisms of integrating various different warrior lineages. We have the famous cult of Draupadi, particularly in the Srirangam region, which is and she's a popular local goddess. She has a Muslim guardian, whose name is Muhammad Khan, who's identified as a Rajput Afghan in the Draupadi temples of South India. Now, a similar pattern is also visible in the folk version of the myth, where Varanandi, and the princess is Varanandi, is a local Muslim princess, and Cheluvaraya is the warrior god. So Varanandi is a local Muslim princess in this region. She probably was the goddess of the various warrior, Muslim warrior lineages which was present here. And Cheluvaraya was also a warrior god in this area. Now, the Cheluvaraya is portrayed as a mendicant, and he's actually shown as a warrior ascetic, whose sphere of habitation and interaction is with the, is the hostile mountainous terrain. Now, which resemble the topography of course, Melkote. Now, both of them get married. And of course, the story of marriage is very interesting because, he woos Varanandi. First, Varanandi declines. And then, of course, she gives a list of promises to be fulfilled. And with great difficulty, he manages to impress Varanandi and then marry her. Now, this marriage between Varanandi and Cheluvaraya symbolized the integration of two sets of warrior lineages and provided a sort of a legitimacy to the matrimonial alliances between these lineages, which expanded the sphere of control of both the groups. All right. And it is these groups, with whom actually the Sri Vaishnavas constantly interacted while they were attempting to consolidate themselves in this region. All right. So we find that the Sri Vaishnava community borrowed, from the local folk tradition of Melkote, of the Varanandi Cheluvaraya marriage, and incorporated the deity as a form of Vishnu, that is Cheluvaraya as a form of Vishnu in the temple at Melkote. And of course, the entire narrative about the Delhi was woven in. Now, the question that arises is that why suddenly the narrative of Delhi gets woven in? Why? I mean, what is the reason? Of all the narratives, why have the hagiographers used the narrative of Delhi? Now, we must remember one thing, and this is where history becomes very important, and this is where hagiographers are very the authors of Guru Parampara are very intelligent. Now, Ramanuja was actually in the in the 12th century, and the first invasion, into the Deccan region, into the Hoysala kingdom, was actually almost 100 years later, or 200, and after that, of course, 200 years later. So at no point of time Ramanuja would have met any one of them, but the question is that don't the hagiographers themselves realize that there is a problem, that there's a problem of dates? Of course they know that, but I don't think that was their concern. Their concern was actually to create a cogent narrative which would become a part of the tradition, and they made it a part of the tradition through festivals, which were being held. And of course, the entire attempt was actually to give a certain kind of a certain kind of a narrative. So, why did they choose the Delhi story? The reason is that this is a period where the political patrons, whom the Sri Vaishnava acharyas were trying to woo, the Hoysalas, followed by Vijayanagar later on, they all were interacting and they were all confronting and fighting battles, with the Tulukas or the Turks of, Delhi. So, and the attack of Malik Kafur on the Hoysala fortifications at Kannanur is something which is very well known, which was also, spoken about in that period. And we find a lot of political biographies or political narratives coming out in this period, which are talking about, this attack. We have Ganga Devi, who's also writing about these attacks, and other people. So it's a very prominent literary narrative in the political texts. Now, if I want to woo, or if I want to impress upon my political patrons, I would also like to incorporate their enemies as my enemies. And this is what exactly the Sri Vaishnava acharyas were doing. They actually, hence took that, they took that legend, they took that, event of the invasion of the Delhi Sultan, and tried to show that the enemies of the Hoysalas and the Vijayanagar rulers, who they wanted to gain attention of, were also their enemies. And there is no way to put it better than to identify or to put Ramanuja, as the savior, and who provided a spiritual guidance of the recovery of the festival. So the religious narratives, what I'm trying to say is that they drew upon the political narratives, as the political narratives were the first ones to use the invasion motive to portray a dominant political ideology. All right. So such an ideology became very significant against the background of an unstable political situation in South India after the disintegration of the Chola kingdom in the 13th century. The ignominious defeat of the Delhi Sultans, referred to as Yavanas, Mlechas, or Turushkas, and the establishment of the political and moral order, by the native ruler or chief, became the theme of several court chronicles and political biographies from the end of the 13th century. As an exalted notion of kingship was projected, where the ruler was an ideal hero, who was combining chivalry with benevolence, the subjugation of an external enemy, and the benefactions made to the prominent temples that were ravaged by the Turks and their attack, upheld the image of the ruler as a protector of Varnashram Dharma, or the moral order. However, such an imaging actually did not tally with the political reality. The reversals suffered by, the Vijayanagar rulers at the hands of the Bahamanis in their battle for the control of the Raichur Doab. And even before that, the reverses which the Hoysalas, suffered tell a very different kind of a story. These accounts of chivalry and valor, of course, influence the Sri Vaishnava, religious narratives. And the invasion motive applied within the religious context justified a past that exhibited an irregular, development of the community. Now, what do I mean by an irregular development of the community? Now, if you look at the inscriptions at Melkote, and also the inscriptions of Sri Rangam and other parts, we find that between the 11th and the 14th century, or let us say the end of the 13th century, the Sri Vaishnava temples were not receiving very many benefactions. Kanchipuram was an exception. They were not receiving very many grants. The Sri Vaishnava Brahmanas themselves were not having good control over these temples. They were not very active in these temples. They were struggling to find their way. Now, this kind of a struggle also coincides with the narrative of the Chola persecution. Whereas the inscriptions tell us a different story, because the Cholas actually patronized a lot of Sri Vaishnava temples. There is no doubt about that. And when we come to Melkote, we find that between the 11th and the 13th century, there isn't very significant development at the Narayan Swami temple. Definitely not at Tondanur and Mithila Shaligrama, and very little at the Narayan Swami temple. So the inscriptions don't actually coincide with Ramanuja's visit, his development of the place, and so on and so forth. The narratives are moving parallel to the inscriptional references. It's only from the 14th century that we find suddenly that Narayan Swami temple becoming very active. You have various acharyas coming in from outside who are called Deshantaris. There is a local, Sri Vaishnava acharyas who are also becoming powerful, and there are tensions between the two. So all these hectic developments are actually from the 14th, centuries. In addition, the defeat of the Hoysalas, as well as the Pandyas, of course, suspended, the patronage which the Sri Vaishnavas had received from them. So under these circumstances, how do I try to attract the attention? How, as a Sri Vaishnava, I try to attract the attention of my future patrons, or my patrons like the Vijayanagar rulers? So the exaggerated accounts of plunder, destruction, and the apparent breakdown of the Sri Vaishnava moral order validated, their position vis-a-vis the Vijayanagar rulers and the warrior elites by projecting a shared past. So the emphasis is on a shared past when both had to confront a common enemy, that is the Turkish invader whom they had to defeat. The narratives conveyed an impression of a collective historical experience that was important to regain the patronage that the Sri Vaishnavas had lost. The result is a general treatment of the invasion in the narratives. We do not find any name of the ruler being mentioned. We do not even find the name of the princess. Neither do the texts discuss any specific incursion. So we don't find these, details. Now, interestingly, the political narratives, of course, do not refer to any matrimonial alliances between the victor, who's of course the Hoysala or Vijayanagar ruler, and the daughter of the defeated, who's the Delhi Sultan. However, the political function of marriage was realized by the Sri Vaishnava discourse. The spousification of the goddess, of Turushka Putri, as Tulaka Nachiyar or as Bibi Nachiyar actually implied a moral victory over the Turks and the assertion of the Sri Vaishnava faith. Therefore, despite an integrated politico-social space, the narratives are actually trying to carve out an autonomous realm for themselves. And in that realm, they are using the local tradition and fusing it with the larger political context. The local regional cultic beliefs of the warrior groups, which influence the delineation of Varanandi as a Muslim in the oral texts, while the political metaphors of invasion and conquest influenced, this entire legend in the written text. All right. So the legends in both the oral and the written genres had relevance for the Sri Vaishnava community. The former, that is at the local level, when they are importing this tradition into the narrative through Ramanuja's efforts, that local tradition is incorporated to impress upon the local warrior lineages. And the larger Delhi Sultan narrative, or the motive, the Turkish motive, is incorporated to attract the Vijayanagar rulers. So this is a kind of a strategy which the narratives adopted, to sort of woo the patronage in this area. Now I come to the final part of it, which is, of course, that when Ramanuja is about to leave Melkote. He stayed there for 12 years. He established Yatiraj Math. The narratives tell us there is a Yatiraja Matha at Melkote. There's no doubt about it. But the reference to the Yatiraja Matha actually comes much later. It comes around 13th century, a little bit after Ramanuja's period. But of course, that doesn't mean that it did not exist. What probably it means is that when there's an inscriptional reference, that it was it sort of became important during this period. That's why the inscriptional references kind of become obvious. Now we find that epigraphical references. Now the question then arises, you can ask me that, did Ramanuja then come to Sri Rangam? I think we may not be asking this question. If we look very directly, if we look very carefully into the inscriptions, they do not record, they in fact record indirect presence of Ramanuja in the Karnataka region and his interactions with the population. And one of the interactions which is very crucial is, that of the interaction with the non-Brahmins. Now, an inscription of the 12th century from Tonuru informs that a certain, servant of Ramanuja received from the ruler Narasimha Deva the village of Yadava Narayana Chaturvedi Mangalam, and the servant in return gifted the village, to another Vaishnava god, in another place. So was the servant of Ramanuja influential, so influential that he received a gift of the village and he could again then re-gift it, somewhere else? So by 14th century, the hagiographical narratives about Ramanuja going to the hill of Melkote in search of white clay, which is Tiruman, recovering the god, installing him, and unearthing a huge amount of Tiruman, seems to have been widely accepted. These stories were very, very popular during that period. An inscription dated around 14th century, that is 1319 to be exact, is as follows, that, and I quote from the inscription: an official of Veer Bilbalal III, Imadi Ravutraya Madappa Dandanayaka, made over the title of land noticed by M. Perumanar as Tirumana, that is holy earth, to Tirumanna Perumal as charity. This is Tirumanna Perumal is of course the god. Now here we find, which is very interesting, and I will like to talk a bit about it, is the references are made to 52. This number 52 is important, and they are referred as the Sri Vaishnava Mahajans, who are donating villages, issuing sale deeds, and receiving land grants. And one of the inscriptions, later inscriptions of the 14th century, dated that as describes the 52 as, and I quote from that inscription, worshippers of the lotus feet, first disciples of Ramanuja Acharya, and the establisher of the path of Vedas. All right. And this particular inscription from Melkote recorded a land grant to the 52. Now, who are these 52? We just need to, sort of look at it, that who are these 52? Now, it is said that when Ramanuja was trying to reorganize the temple at Melkote, he felt that everybody should be given an access to the temple, irrespective of their caste status. One of the enduring images of Ramanuja is that of compassion, that of a social reformer. In the modern period, he is in the pantheons of social reformers that we have. Ramanuja is, of course, he is considered a social reformer. All right. Now, he is supposed to have incorporated a large number of non-Brahmins, not only in other temples, but also even in the temple at Melkote. And it is said that he introduced the services of the 52 Srivaishnavas, who at one place in some of the hagiographies, not all, are referred to as Shudras, all right, at Melkote, all right. And not all hagiographies mention this. The earlier hagiographies don't talk about it. Divyasuri Charitam and Yatiraja Vaibhavam, they definitely, which are the earlier hagiographies, they don't talk about, the 52. Whereas the latter hagiographies like Araira Guru Parampara, Prabhavam, Muaira Padi, Yatindra Pravanda, and Prapannamritam, they are actually talking about the 52 and Ramanuja's association with them. All right. So Ramanuja is supposed to have instituted the festival of Adhyanotsava, installed the images of Namalwar, Andal, and other Alwars. All right. And these Guru Paramparas, actually in detail describe Ramanuja's stay at the Karnataka region. Now, according to these hagiographies, there are more stories about Ramanuja rejecting caste differences and, of course, helping people and bringing them into the fold of Sri Vaishnavism. Now, I relate one of these stories. According to one of these stories, after escaping the persecution of the Chola ruler, Ramanuja came to the Hoysala kingdom in Karnataka and took refuge in a forest. The hunting community there welcomed him enthusiastically and provided the much needed hospitality to him and his disciples, who were exhausted after their flight from Chola king's harassment. The narrative goes on that the hunters already knew about Ramanuja as one of their gurus, presumably a hunter too, in the course of his discourses had told them that Ramanuja was their Dharma Acharya. So even if Ramanuja hasn't visited this place, his fame had spread far and wide. So the hunters offered Ramanuja and his disciples honey, uncooked millet, and told them to prepare the food and eat, and they did so. The following morning, the hunters took them to another hunter's house, who thought that since the Brahmanas were fasting, he would also not eat. He then took them to a Brahmana house in a nearby village and instructed that Brahmana to cook for them and serve them. Thereafter, Ramanuja and his disciples had their meals and left. So this interaction with the hunters is actually very interesting. It tells us about the fact that there was an image of Ramanuja already before in this area, which was very, very positive. And the fact is that, he was very popular amongst the non-Brahmina section of the population. Now, the references to the 52, appears. When does it appear in the narrative? Sorry, I made a mistake. It does appear in Divyasuri Charitam, but not in Yatiraja Vaibhavam. Now, the reference to the 52, which appears in the narratives, is actually during the installation of the temple at Yadugiri, which is Melkote. All right. And we are also informed about the social status of 52, as I had told you. All right. Now, the hagiographies tell us that after the festival was introduced, Ramanuja established the Yatiraja Matha, appointed the 52 taught them the services or kainkarya to the god, and gave them the title of the Sri Vaishnava. He enjoined that they would be called Sri Vaishnava in public, but Dasyanama in private. Brief information of social groups that comprise the 52 are provided in these narratives. Who are these 52? It's interesting, and I would like to share them with you. They range from women, that is Kotre Ammai Margal, to guards, to disciples who did not wear the thread, that is the Shatada Mudali girls, so naturally they are not Brahmins, to and of course some of the hunters also. So basically the group of 52 appear to be consisting largely of non-Brahmins. Now, the expansion of the Sri Vaishnava network, thus, which Ramanuja's travel in Melkote indicated, was to be understood mostly in terms of the incorporation of various non-Brahmin elements into the temple organization and network. It's not only the hunters and the women and the guards, etc. It's also various warrior lineages. I may risk a bit and say the Muslim warrior lineages too, but that's my interpretation. And the so this kind of expansion of the social base is something which is very crucial, because it makes Sri Vaishnavism in the Karnataka region far more accessible and popular. Now, the modern biographies, which are written in the 20th century, 21st century on Ramanuja, they state that, according to them, Ramanuja took a bold step. This was a very bold step in Melkote to declare, the outcasts. And in fact, they use the word outcast for these people as Tirukulattar, that is, people belonging to the family of Lakshmi or Divine Mother, and accommodating them in the temple organization. And hence, for them, this was, of course, a major development, and it sort of, eulogizes and upholds Ramanuja's status as a social reformer. All right. Uh, it's very important for us to realize that, the religious traditions, all religious traditions in this period, and Sri Vaishnavism including, were also engaging with issues of social hierarchy and inclusion of non-Brahminical groups within the community structure, and it is in this engagement that they were trying to bring them as much as possible into the temple network. And that is why Narayana Swami temple becomes very important. All right. And we find that one of the important aspects of this Narayan Swami temple is the group of 52 who actually occupied a very important ritual place in the 15th and the 16th century, so much so, and this is through the inscriptions, that when the various Sri Vaishnava acharyas are fighting with each other over the control of the temple, this group of 52 actually are shown to be intervening and settling the dispute. So these are some of the important aspects, which we find, are actually, mentioned about Ramanuja's visit to Karnataka. How much time do I have, Pradeep?
Madam, you have 10 minutes, madam. 10
okay,
plus minutes.
I will be wrapping up. Now I come to the last aspect, his return. His return to now, the narratives tell us that suddenly, he was, he heard that the Chola ruler had died, because the Chola ruler was afflicted with a disease that there were worms in his throat, and because he died, his disciples in Srirangam informed him that the situation was very favorable there. So, Ramanuja wanted to leave, but nobody wanted him to go. So he decided to make a statue of himself, and leave it at Melkote, and told his disciples that they must worship this statue and think about him. And then, of course, with his Tamil disciples, he comes back to Srirangam. Now, the question that arises is, now there are 2-3 questions which I have been grappling with. One is that, should we ask this question, that whether Ramanuja's visit was an exile or persecution, or was it, a journey or an odyssey, which he was taking in other parts of the country to spread Sri Vaishnavism? Uh, B.R. Gopal's book, if you ever get a chance, it's a 1983 book, so I don't know whether it's even available now. Uh, B.R. Gopal tries to compare the inscriptions with, the various stories or various narratives. And in 1983, for a scholar to make such bold contentions is something which is very commendable. And he made a very bold contention that a large number of these, narratives do not have a historical basis when you compare them with inscriptions. However, I'll not get into that argument. Gopal says that Ramanuja was persecuted and he entered Karnataka, to escape that persecution. I will not ask this question, that whether it was persecution or whether it was a journey or a travel to expand the Sri Vaishnava base. The question that I'll ask is that, why is Melkote of all the places included, in the Sri Vaishnava narratives, in the hagiographies, where Ramanuja's story is concerned? Why not other places which did have an active Vaishnava, tradition? Why weren't they included? Very clearly, it is the importance of this area, which I have listed about. It was an important trading center. It was an important agricultural center. It was because it's on a hill, it has protection. There are various warrior groups, who are very, very powerful. You have the Vijayanagar rulers, Nayakas, also becoming powerful in this region. So it was and there is a lot of interaction between, the Hoysalas and the Tamil region. And when the Vijayanagar Empire is established, there's an interaction also, particularly with Sri Ranga. So it would be, it would be too much not to pay attention to this area, to attract followers and to attract patronage. And it is with this, intention in mind, that Melkote became extremely important, so important that today, when we talk about the 108 Divyadesas, Narayan Swami's temple, at Melkote is also spoken of after the 108. Such is the importance, because the 108 is a more of a ritual, traditional figure which cannot be tampered with. But the Narayan Swami temple finds, a constant reference. It resonates in all the Sri Vaishnava traditions. Now, another thing which becomes very, very important for us to look at is that, why don't historians talk about, the other other Vaishnava traditions here? Why only when they talk about the when they talk about the Vaishnava tradition, the entire focus is actually on Ramanuja and his visit, and not after that. Because after that also, it is very important. The fact that the Hoysalas patronized the Sri Vaishnavas is evident. The Hoysalas were a powerful dynasty. And, we have latter day Nayakas, particularly one of them, who makes an Andal temple, and, who has an Andal shrine and an Andal temple. And he actually goes to Halebiru and takes the pillars, from there, which are actually the Vaishnava, which have Vaishnava motives, and brings it back, into, and installs it in the Andal. He brings the pillars which are in the Andal shrine and puts them there in the temple. The temple from where he brings is the Chennakeshava temple. Now, clearly, why is he doing it? Why is he importing the Hoysala era temple pillars into the temple pillars of his period? This is because he, as a Nayaka, wants, and he's a political figure, wants to establish a lineage with the Hoysala past. So clearly the Hoysalas, even if they had declined, their memory was that of a important, powerful dynasty with which this particular Naika was, interested to attach himself with. He wanted to attach himself with that memory, by showing that he's in their line, so that there is an acceptance amongst the people. Now, this, what I'm talking about, is written by Kathleen Kasargod in a very interesting article which came out in South Asia some years ago, where she's actually talking about this kind of an interborrowing from the Hoysala period and from the Chalukya period also by the Vijayanagar Naikas, and a large number of them were doing it, particularly in this particular region. So what becomes very crucial for us to understand is that if we say that it is persecution and hence Ramanuja came here, it's actually showing the inclusion of Melkote by accident. All right. Whereas in my opinion, it is not an accident. It is something which is carefully thought of, to attach or to incorporate this area in order to win the patronage. Now, the kind of Sri Vaishnavism which developed in this area had a tremendous role to play later on, in the Naika period, even before that in the Vijayanagar period. And we find that, the Naikas, from this period encouraged agriculture, made land grants, and also involved themselves in a lot of internal trading activities. So it was a very, very prosperous area. Now, so I think the question that I would like to ask is that why Melkote suddenly in the 13th and the 14th century, where we are being told, about Ramanuja's contribution to it. We also should not forget that in the 14th century, there is another Sri Vaishnava institution which is making an entry into this Mysore, Mandya, Melkote region, which is that of the Brahmatantra Parakala Swatantra Mat. Brahmatantra Swatantra Parakala Mat, I'm sorry. Now, this Mat, the gears of these Mat, was supposed to have been in the Tamil region, and they were not able to find a base anywhere. They were in the Kanchipuram region, then they were eliminated from there. They went to Tirupati, thinking they will be away from the politics, of the Srirangam region, but they could not settle there. And hence they gradually started moving towards Mysore. So clearly, the southern part of Karnataka was offering a far more friendlier atmosphere to the Sri Vaishnava, followers. And so they kind of migrated there. And by the end of the 14th century, they established their institution there. And it is a very powerful mutt today. I don't know whether it's today that powerful, but definitely in the 18th and the 19th century, it played a very important role. And it also, the Matha also, if you look at their histories and the Guru Parampara, they also relate themselves to Ramanuja very strongly. They consider themselves or their gurus as a part of the direct descendant of Ramanuja. Ramanuja is supposed to have had, Simhasanapatis, some 74 odd Simhasanapatis, out of which the Parakala Swami is also supposed to have been one of them. So this kind of a direct lineage with Ramanuja in the Karnataka region is very crucial for the identity of this mutt. So I stop here today, and I don't know whether I've made myself very clear because it's so complex. There is so much to say, but I try to sort of, be as concise as possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, madam, for a wonderful presentation. It really opened the various nuances of hagiographies and its politics and history on Ramanuja and Sri Vaishnava tradition across Karnataka. So now it is the time for questions. First, I would like to take questions from Dr. S.K. Rooney. So I take question from one by one, and later I open the forum for the people who want to ask question orally.
Yeah, so I would like to.
Yeah. First, Vijay, I ask. Okay, yeah. Vijay, please go ahead with your question.
No. Let the first written questions, please. Later on, I can take intervention.
Okay, Vijay. Once I read out the written question, I'll ask Vijay and Professor Manu sir and other friends to ask questions orally. The first question from Dr. S.K. Aruni is that uh, historian Shutter argues that before Ramanuja's arrival in the Hoysala region, there were many Vishnu temples and also influence of Thiruvengalanatha cult in the region. How much impact of Ramanuja's myth could be seen in the southern Karnataka region?
Well, there is an impact. I mean, that's what I have been trying to say, is that when we look at the inscriptions, from 14th century onwards, because that is when they become very large in number in this region, uh, all these inscriptions claim, they very clearly state, that they are bowing down to Ramanuja. They claim to be the guru. So clearly there is an impact of Ramanuja, his persona in this region. And then what follows in these inscriptions is the reference to, various, Srivaishnava leaders, and of course their issues regarding donations, control over the mathas, and so on and so forth. So there is an impact, of Ramanuja, in the sense that there is a recognition of the fact that he was an important figure and we must acknowledge him. That is how I would look at it. And uh, if I have to go a little further, the fact that in the 14th century the Narayan Swami temple is very active, could also be, I mean, after all, everything the hagiographical narratives are not making up, could also be because, it was before the 14th century, its foundations, etc., were laid by, and it was made into a proper institution by Ramanuja's visit here. I mean, that's how I would sort of think about it. I don't know whether I've answered the question, but there is an impact, Now, that is the question that I also want to engage in, that the pre-existing Vaishnava cults, how are they interacting with Sri Vaishnavism? For that, that kind of a study is missing, and while, because we are also overwhelmed by studying, Sri Vaishnavism and Ramanuja, that we actually forget, or we overlook the fact that there are active, traditions in this area, which, and how are they interacting? Is there a tension between them? Because the fact that, the narratives are saying that there is a god who has to be recovered from the Yadavagiri lake, and the temple is there, but it is lying in ruins, which shows that there would have been something out here, which probably was still very active, but is now incorporated or appropriated, or it wasn't active and now it is being revived. That is the assumption that one can make. But this is a question even I keep asking, that how did these various traditions interact with Sri Vaishnavism? So that is a research which should be done. It's worthwhile taking up.
Thank you, madam. That is a question. I think it is from Ibrahim Saudagar. It seems that he has entered in the middle of that session. I think he has missed out your presentation on this issue. So I ask you, once again, elaborate on this. The myth of Bibi Nachiyar, where the Ramanuja established Utsava Murti, which he recovered from Delhi Sultan. How can it possible the establishment of Delhi Sultanate was in 1206? Ramanuja was died in 1137 AD. This you have already mentioned, but I think he missed out while entered.
Yeah. I would like to say something. We often ask, okay, not we, let me say, often I, or let us say when we were students, we ask the wrong questions sometimes. Is it true? Is it false? This is our favorite question. Did it happen? Did it not happen? I think it's very difficult. Historically, always we cannot establish these things, in such clear-cut terms. I think what is very important is that why are our sources, mentioning these? Why are they talking about these? I think that is very crucial. And if we look into that, then rather than trying to establish the truth and the falsity of the stories, then we are just going in circles, because somebody will say it's true, somebody will say it is not true. It will just keep on and on. Though here the dates are very far off, but I do remember in one presentation when I had said it, someone said that no, it is true that there was a confrontation, because the Muslims of the Melkote were very active. They were usually Arab traders. So he went on a different discourse, which I'm not aware of. He could be right, I don't know, but which I'm not aware of. So it actually puts us into an area which we don't know. So I think it's very important for us to actually examine why are our sources talking about these things in this way. They are, and to kind of dismiss them as exaggerated, as ignorant, I think it's not right, because the hagiographies are written by very intelligent people. They know what they are doing and why they are doing. That is, and we have to actually get into their mind to see why they are doing. That is our job. I think that's the way I will look at it. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Question from N. Manu Chakravarti, former professor in NMKRV College, Bengaluru. He has two questions. First, I read out one of his first question. Ramanuja did not really, it's a explanation. Ramanuja did not really engage himself with the Upanishads. He did not write on them. His question is, Ramanuja and Vedanta Deshika are attacked as Avaidika too. It was Ramanuja who borrowed from the Pancharatras and the Agama traditions and introduced idols and rituals, and was thus attacked by Advaitins. Ramanuja explains that these were physical manifestations of the Supreme Brahmin, Supreme Brahman, and hence are not anti-Advaitic. This is qualified monism. More such deep philosophical debates are in it. So I think these are the explanations.
Okay, can I reply to this, please?
Yeah, please.
It is not right. After all, what is Sribhashya? Sribhashya is the commentary on Upanishads. Ramanuja is located in the Vedantic tradition. What is Vedanta? That is the end of Vedas. The end of Vedas is Upanishads. Okay. So, and he's not the only one who's, commenting on the Upanishads. We have Shankara before him commenting on Upanishad. After him, we have Madhvacharya commenting. We have Vallabhacharya commenting. So you see, there is not one kind of a Vedantic tradition. There are several Vedantic traditions. This is a very intellectual, philosophical, issue. And as students of history, this has been a big gap in our historical training, that we don't engage with history of ideas in pre-colonial period. There is a strong intellectual tradition, and Ramanuja is a part of it. He's a part of this Vedantic tradition. So he writes his Sribhashya is actually a commentary on Upanishads. Even Shankara's Sribhashya is also a commentary on Upanishads. It is true that Ramanuja, later on Vedanta Deshika, they were attacked by Advaitas. But what I'm trying to tell you is that I'm looking at it from the Srivaishnava point of view. The rivalry between the Advaitins and the Srivaishnavas is very, very elaborately recorded in these hagiographies, in these Guru Paramparas, not in the inscriptions. And the question we ask is why? Because there is an urge on the part of the Srivaishnavas to show that that they have a philosophical base, they have an intellectual base which is superior to Shankara's, Advaita. There is a very famous story about his fight, or his, not fight, but his tension with his guru, who is, of course, Yadava Prakasha, who's a very famous Advaitin, and he was a part of his, of his Gurukul. And because Ramanuja used to challenge him in the debates, he would ask uncomfortable questions. Yadava Prakasha was very annoyed with him, so much so that he thought Ramanuja would, challenge his position. And he had actually planned to get Ramanuja killed. But he was not successful because, the narratives say that, God intervened and Ramanuja was saved. But clearly, we don't have to take this literally, but clearly there is a lot of tension between the Advaitins and the, and Ramanuja. So there's there's a tension between two kinds of interpretations. That's very clear. And, the tension between the Guru and the Shishya is again very obvious. So if they are mixing with each other, they're interacting with each other. At the same time, there are tensions and disputes between the two also. And then Ramanuja breaks away and establish and sort of asserts his tradition. And it is true, that part is right, that he was somebody unlike Shankara. He believed that God has a swarup, the God has a form, all right, and he is the Brahman, whereas for Shankara, the soul and the Brahman, they're all one people. So he is the Brahman. So God is the Brahman, and you have to have faith. I mean, you have to surrender yourself to God. So that part is right. The qualified monism part is right. That is why it is Vishishta Advaita. It's qualified monism. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Question from SP Wagishwari, Dr. SP Wagishwari, professor in Christ University, Bangalore. The question is, the Vedanta tradition itself is a, sorry, one second. Could it be, one second, I'll read out Professor Manu Chakravarti's intervention. Sir, Manu sir, do you want to, speak orally or comment or, or intervene orally? Manu sir, can you hear me? If it is so, okay. I'll read out his
comment
explanation. Yeah. Comments for your answer. Yeah, the Vedanta tradition itself is a very complex one. Great philosophers like Daya Krishna do not accept Prasthanatraya, and all the acharyas had different texts as Prasthanatraya. Gita Bhashya is one on Bhagavad Gita. That's a long critical affair written. That's what he's saying.
No, he's right. Professor Chakravarti is very right. It is hugely complex. But you see, Ramanuja is also part of that. We cannot ignore him. In fact, one of my, I wouldn't say quarrels, but one of my problems with modern philosophers have been this, that I'm not saying that Dayakrishnan is one of them, is that, they always make Shankara as very intellectual, very philosophical, engaging in metaphysical matters. And Ramanuja is considered to be popular, who appealed to the masses. Hence, it looks as if Ramanuja is less intellectual, and that is something I am not very happy with. Also in the studies on philosophy, because we are borrowing from the Western model very often, there's nothing wrong in it. We try to make a distinction between philosophy and theology, where philosophy doesn't have to engage with religion, it is above that, and theology engages with religion. In Indian intellectual traditions, I personally feel this distinction does not hold, because both have deeply intellectual, aspects, and both are interacting with each other, and they are learning from each other. They are engaging with each other. They disagree also, and they agree also. So I, would not be very happy with this kind of a distinction. That's my disagreement with a lot of modern philosophers. But I can be wrong, because I'm not a philosopher. I engage with history. And as I said, that as student of history, this has been one of our drawbacks. We have never worked on history of ideas in the pre-colonial period. We have left it to the philosophers to engage with. So I can be wrong, but this is my opinion.
Thank you, madam. Now I'm taking Professor SP Wagishwari, madam question. She's teaching in Christ University, Bangalore. Could it be said that the rivalry between Advaitins and Vaishnavites was also over the fact that Sri Vaishnavism emerged as a heterodoxy in terms of its assertion on social egalitarianism?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Could it be said that the rivalry between Advaitins and Vaishnavites was also over the fact that Srivaishnavism emerged as a heterodoxy in terms of its assertion on social egalitarianism.
Not during Ramanuja's period. If you read Ramanuja's works, he does not talk about, uh, I I think I saw Professor Chakravarti's comment. I have read his Sri Bhashya, the first sutra. It's the longest sutra and a very complex one. I sat with a Sanskrit guru and I read it. And one thing that struck me first was the language. Such brilliant language in which, the language is so beautiful. And that is where you understand that, there is a difference between various kinds of Sanskrit. Even Shankara wrote very beautifully, so all these people, they had great command over the language. There's no doubt about it, and when we read Ramanuja's Sri Bhashya, the first sutra, he is not very forthcoming on caste, where he talks about bhakti and all. In fact, he says that no, everybody doesn't have access to it, but that doesn't make us suddenly pronounce a judgment on him, because as I said, he's engaging with different set of audience. His audience is not, the audience that we are imagining it. It is the latter day, hagiographers who actually, when they are writing the hagiographies, they are, showing him to be deeply egalitarian, or, someone who disrespects the, not disrespect, I'm sorry, that's a wrong word to who disregards the Varna barriers. This is, again, as I said, we can't ask this question. It's very difficult to ask this question, that whether he, was actually like this. We don't know. His own writings don't talk about it. One place where there is a reference, he's not very forthcoming on it. All right. So his engagement with the Advaitins has been purely intellectual. When Ramanuja was on the scene, in the 12th and the 13th century, there were three parallel Vaishnava traditions which were there. One was that of the Alvars, one was the Pancharatra Agamic, or the Agamic tradition, which was, focusing on the temples, etc. And the third was, of course, I think the tradition which actually came from the Sangam period, and it went on. So these were these three traditions, with which Ramanuja was there on one side, and on the other side, there were the Advaitins. I have very strongly asserted in my book, and I do believe that Ramanuja was engaging with the Advaitins mostly. He may have borrowed from these traditions. We can't say that he wasn't aware of it. We have no way to say that. I'm sure he would be aware of it. He was, but his engagement was primarily with the Advaitins. He was actually debating with them, writing in his writings. That's very clear. So I'm not sure that, whether that has to do with it, but it's the latter day hagiographers, that is 100 years after him, who very clearly position him, in a way that he's shown actually more to be a philosopher and less of a social reformer. If you read the sections on Ramanuja, more than 3/4 of it is actually his engagement with the Advaitins, and the rest is to do with, his social outlook, going from place to place, reviving the Srivaishnava temples, introducing the Srivaishnava, tradition, and Melkote is a part of it. But actually, more than 3/4 of the narratives are his engagement with the Advaitins. So he's actually shown to be a very strong philosopher. That is the way it is. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Again, Professor Manu Chakravarti is adding some information. It's just information. I must make it clear, I have studied Ramanuja with great teachers. So I'm making qualification, not at all suggesting that Ramanuja is not intellectual. He is too important for me. This is his comment.
No, I'm sure. But Professor Chakravarti, I also beg ignorance, because I haven't studied philosophy. I'm self-taught. With whatever little it is, I'm self-taught. So, as I said, I would definitely like to stand corrected. But it is actually one of my ambitions, my future project, to compare the Guru Paramparas of Shankara and Ramanuja. That is actually a project that I want to engage in, and to see how both of them are being depicted. Because most of the time when I read books on Indian philosophy, there is a quarrel between Shankara and Ramanuja, and nowadays, Advaita is very fashionable. People forget Vishishta Advaita. In Delhi, at least, you have Advaita Center. People go there, they meditate. It's shown to be a very highly spiritual, elevated tradition, which it is. I'm not denying that. But the other Vedantic traditions also have to be engaged with. They can't be ignored or marginalized. That is my quarrel. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you. And Professor is thanking you with greetings. He's conveying thanks to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is an observation by young scholars from Bengaluru known as Sunkam Govardhan. He's just suggesting why Ramanuja did not came to Sri Rangapatna. Why? Because he's answering himself. Why? Because he came from Antyaranga. Sri Rangapatna is Adiranga, which is on the banks of Kaveri too. That is what he wants.
I don't know why he didn't come. It's a counterfactual question, very difficult to answer why he didn't come, or he may have crossed it for all that, after all, that geography is the same. So I can't say. And I'm not too sure whether Srirangapatnam had a presence that strong in that period. I can't answer this question because I really don't know, why he didn't come. All right. I'm just going by the analysis of what is mentioned in the narratives. Yeah.
Surprisingly, yesterday I came to know that Govardhan is recently he wrote a piece on Ramanuja in Karnataka. It's about 20 to 25 pages.
Oh, I must read it. I really must read it.
Okay. And now I I request to Vijay Boratti to unmute himself and ask question. Please, Vijay, go. Proceed.
Thank you, Pradeep. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. First of all, congratulations to Ranjana Datta for very nice, coherent, historiographical narration of Ramanujan cult in Karnataka. And you have touched upon material conditions which made or remade Ramanujan cult. Very interesting historical facts and analysis too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. My observation is something related to modern constructions of medieval saint, poet, or religious cults. So if you find a question, you can tease it out and answer it. But basically, it's an observation. When we were school children, students of school, we were always taught that there are mainly two religious cults of the medieval period, which are considered as progressive, reformist, and egalitarian. And some of my predecessor question askers have also pointed out this one, which are modern in nature, especially the construction of medieval religious cults. And we were told that among these religious cults, there are two important religious figures who are always talked about as progressive and reformist. One is Basavana, and later it is Ramanujan. It's left to the historiographers to point out who preceded whom. I'm not going to get into that question. However, in recent times, some recent rethinking efforts of modern constructions of medieval cults or saint poets of that period are heavily focused on one religious cult of the medieval period, that is Basavana's cult. Okay, and Basavana is here, focusing on the modern construction of Basavana as reformist. Especially his compositions are strongly criticized. And for criticizing Basavana's reformist attributes are based on criticism on Vachanas, prose poetic composition of the 12th century. And the criticism on Vachanas is premised once again on modern constructions, because these modern constructions were Western borrowed concepts borrowed from colonialism, Orientalism, etc., etc. and which is, I think, I mean, when we talk about Basavana's image as reformist or progressive or egalitarian, and strong criticism of it is partially is problematic, very partial, and short of comprehensive historiography. But there is also equally absolute silence on modern construction of Ramanujan. I mean, there is no strong critique of Ramanujan as a reformist or egalitarian religious figure in the medieval period compared to Basavana. Actually, whenever I'm talking about the recent rethinking efforts of some scholars. So I mean, the modern constructions of Basavana or Ramanujan as reformist mostly were colonial. Even if we take them as colonial construction, Basavana is strongly criticized while there is an absolute silence on Ramanujan. I don't know why this partial.
You're very right, and I was hesitating to talk like this, but I think you have been far more forthright about it. It is very important to see how, these saints are received in the modern times. What is happening in the case of Ramanuja, of which I know more, is that the hagiographies are not the same in their narrative. I have not been able to point out the differences, in great detail, but there are differences, they're not the same. And they are changing over a period of time. After all, between Ramanuja and modern times, there's a difference of, 800 years, 1000 years, whatever. The variations of the hagiographies have been ignored, and a fixed image of Ramanuja as a social reformer has been presented. And, if you read the hagiographies, first thing, we must understand our sources. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to show Ramanuja as a social reformer? No, they're actually trying to show Ramanuja as a philosopher. That doesn't mean he can't be a social reformer. But the narratives on caste, on social reform are very little in these texts. They're not so much. It is actually the latter Srivaishnava traditions in the temples and in the mathas, which are far more inclusive, which are trying to include, despite all its efforts, Srivaishnava tradition remains largely a Brahminical tradition. We cannot deny that, they're trying to include as many people as possible. And that is where, the discourse, identifying it with Ramanuja becomes important. Could be that Ramanuja had, probably introduced these things, in the temples, but did not, but after his death, it wasn't carried on, or it wasn't even carried on in his lifetime. So they kind of took it up from there. But otherwise, you see, the point is that they are not at all trying to show him as a social reformer. Social reformer is a very modern category. If you remember right at the beginning of my lecture, I was trying to say that we have to actually see what our sources are trying to say and not impose our modern worldview on it. Problem is, we are constantly, looking for answers to our modern questions in the medieval past. And when we do that, then that's when the problem starts coming. Because the medieval past is not there for us to see, and experience. It is coming to us through several centuries, of, the tradition going. So I do agree with you that unlike Basavana, Ramanuja's image as a social reformer has been taken, totally. If you read any book, right from Ramakrishna Mission's writings, which they publish, to other texts, he's just uncritically taken as a social reformer. To the extent that when historians are writing on Ramanuja, they also silently accept him as a social reformer. I don't know why this has not been challenged. In fact, it is such a powerful imagery that I'm sure you would be aware that there was a serial on Sun TV called Ramanujan, which Karunanidhi had written had written the script. I don't know whether you saw it. The emphasis on social reform, on caste hierarchy was so strong, as if that is what was central to Ramanuja's life in the narratives, which is actually not correct. So I don't know why this has not happened. It's actually worthwhile to make this comparison. I think it will be good to make this comparison, that if Basavana has been criticized and critically accepted, why hasn't Ramanuja been?
Ma'am, I have one question.
Yeah.
Madam, please introduce yourself. Dr. N.R. Lalitamba, she's teaching in first grade college, Vijayanagara.
Okay.
Okay, proceed
Namaste,
with the
ma'am.
question.
Namaste, ma'am.
Yeah.
Actually, I worked on Jettikula, that is
Yeah.
wrestlers. The influence of Ramanuja on Jettikula, I have worked on that, and particularly in Undignalu, which is in Hassan district.
Yeah.
These wrestlers, no, they worship Ramanuja's statue
Yes.
as Nanulu Jettappa.
Yeah.
And they call them as Jettikula, Jettappa, their own god, who has really made some reformations and some social change in their own this one samudaya. Okay, so they call him as a social reformer only, and they don't accept that it is Ramanuja's statue. And I have worked and Navanulu Jettappa, because why they call it as Navanulu Jettappa means they put this Jenivaram this on Jettappa, and also they give this other non-vegetarian food as Naivedyam and other things.
Okay.
And all the traditions they follow is almost Brahminical traditions. They will have Gotras and they do Sandhyavana, everything. But I want to ask you, have you really done some research on the influence of Ramanuja's cult on the people now, Anusandhana now,
Yes,
what is happening?
yes, not in South India, but in North India.
Warrior groups, particularly these warrior groups,
Yeah.
this bus with
I haven't done
Vaishnava
it in.
tradition, and also jettis with Vaishnava tradition and mahuts. These are our warrior troops, and they follow very strongly this Ramanuja, this tradition. Okay, and they will call him as their reformer only. He has made a wonderful contribution to their society as such, and they have almost they got all this respect in the society because of their Jetappa and their god. But they don't identify their god as Ramanuja, but the statue which they worship is Ramanuja only. And they'll put, and even they are using this Janivaram and other things. So I want to know exactly, if I'm not good in English, ನನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ, if somebody can really translate it. ಇವತ್ತು ಏನು ಸಮುದಾಯ ಬದುಕ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಕೂಡ ರಾಮಾನುಜರ ಕೆಲವು ವಿಚಾರಗಳಿಗೆ ಅನುಸಂಧಾನ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗೆಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ವೈಷ್ಣವ ಕುಲಗಳಿವೆ, ತಳ ಸಮುದಾಯದಿಂದ ಬಂದಿರೋದು. ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಬದುಕನ್ನ ನಾವು ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬಸವಣ್ಣನವರ ಬಗೆಗೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರುವಂತಹ ಅಧ್ಯಯನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸು ಹೀಗೆ ಸಮುದಾಯದ ಜನರ ಮೇಲೆ ಹೇಗಾಗಿದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿದ ಹಾಗೆ ನಾವು ರಾಮಾನುಜರನ್ನ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ವಿ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ರಾಮಾನುಜ ಆಸ್ ಫಿಲಾಸಫರ್, ನಾಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ರಿಫಾರ್ಮರ್. ನಾವು ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ರಿಫಾರ್ಮರ್ ಆಗಿ ನೋಡ್ಬಹುದಾದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಜನಸಮುದಾಯದ ಬದುಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ತಂದಿರುವ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಯನ್ನ ನಾವು ಇವತ್ತು ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ then we can really establish Ramanuja as not just not Acharya but also a social reformer anta nanige ansutte. If somebody can translate it to her, thank you for giving me an opportunity.
Professor Lalitamba is saying the various, the idea of idea and transmission of Srivaishnava culture, especially through Ramanuja in the area of Hasana, in so-called Jatti, Mallappa culture and other things, and why Ramanuja is incorporated and why the culture is disseminated. That is what she is asking. She is focusing.
It's a very interesting question that Dr. Lalita has asked, because I haven't worked on these groups, and it's a good information that you've given me. I have, however, traveled extensively in the Vrindavan region, all right, and there Ramanuja is seen as a social reformer. There was a group called the Ramanandis in the 19th century. And Ramanandis say that their guru was Ramanand, who is supposed to have been a disciple of Ramanuja. And Ramanand, was in Tamil region, but he had some quarrel with his fellow disciples, because probably he felt they were too Sanskritist or what, I don't know. And then he came to the northern region and settled in Vrindavan, and he had huge disciples. And the Ramanandis actually belong to the non-Brahmana group. All right, and there is another group in the Vrindavan region called the Ramanujis. They say we are actually direct descendants of Ramanuja, and they are the warrior community, but they are local warriors. They're actually pastoral warriors. Their their stories are stories about how their ancestors died while protecting cows, etc. Now I think if we shift our focus from the person, from the individual, which is Ramanuja, and look at how he has been received by people, then I think our question will somewhat, get addressed, because it is not Ramanuja himself. It is the way people have received him. It is coming through various layers of time, and clearly, as it was being said previously, that probably this kind of an image of him as what we are calling today social reformer seems to have been, or let us say his large heartedness or compassion, that is constantly being focused upon all the time in the hagiography. What he was personally, we do not know. We cannot say, because he's not saying anything about himself, and it is only the narratives in the Guru Paramparas which are telling us. So an image is being built, which is getting disseminated, getting carried on. We don't, so each area would have its specificity in the way in which the individuality, or let us say the personality of Ramanuja has been received. So that would be an interesting study to make. Like I was saying, that we must look at the pre-existing Sri Vaishnava traditions and see how they're interacting with the Sri Vaishnavas. It would also be very important to add this, that how throughout history, after all, Ramanuja was 12th century, and 8 to 900 years have passed by. In fact, more have passed by. So how has he been received? Because when I critique the fact that he is the scholars who were writing biographies of Ramanuja in the 21st century or 20th century, hesitantly, unquestioningly, they accept Ramanuja as a social reformer. So do the historians. I think there's a larger question also which needs to be asked, is that why is this image of him so enduring? So, and how can we take it back historically? When we look at the hagiographical narratives, I don't think he is being portrayed there as a social reformer. It
Yeah,
is
ma'am.
only in the practical areas of the temple matters that we find constant references being made. That today we are expanding this ritual. Today we are allowing, people to attend, these rituals, because Ramanuja intended to do, and things like that. Because there is this very famous story of his, where where he goes to Goshti Purna, one of the gurus, and shouts out of the temple, but it's a very powerful story, because he shouted a mantra which was not meant to be heard by anyone except the Brahmins. It was a secret, it was a rahasya, but he shouted
Ma'am,
out, and
that's what,
so
ma'am.
that everybody could hear it. And
Ma'am,
when
that was the
Goshti Purna confronted him and
no?
said,
Can I,
sorry.
ma'am? That was the only context always we talk about. But
Yes,
I
well,
really want to say what I want to say is just we have to focus Ramanuja studies as a social reformer and the influence of Ramanuja and his thoughts or whatever his lifestyles and whatever his philosophy, how it is really benefited to the downtrodden people, and how this Vakkalutana has really improved their lifestyles, and also how they got into the front line of the society. And that's what the area where we have to, that is the area where we have to focus on, I think. So we
Well,
have
if
to
you read
take
his philosophy, one, it's so difficult to understand because they write.
not as yeah, yeah,
But
ma'am.
if
Yeah,
you read his
we have
philosophy,
almost focused as a social reformer. So for that, we have to do this field work, because in Bukkaraya's Shasana, there are so many different types of samudayas. But what happened to them after 15th century? And what is their social status? And what is their relationship between this politics and culture? And how this temple culture included them? And what happened to them? These warrior groups, what happened to them after Vijayanagara's fall? That is a very interesting area
True,
where we can
true.
really find Ramanuja's influence till date nowadays. How
But
really it is,
Ramanuja did not even come here.
whatever may be, Ramanuja as a philosopher and his philosophy, the influence of Basavanna has not come everywhere, but his philosophy and his this one
Okay.
influenced Karnataka people. So as Ramanuja's. So we have to study these samudayas.
If you're talking about his philosophy, but what would be his philosophy? Would the philosophy be the works which he has written, or would the philosophy be the one which the hagiographies are describing? There's a difference between the two, because the works which he has written don't engage with the social question.
That's what, madam. As a Acharya, we cannot really establish him as a social reformer.
Yes,
But yeah, what you
so yeah,
told,
I
na,
get your point, and it's a point which is well taken.
yeah, ma, including every small communities in the temple culture and temple activities, those things happened just because of Ramanuja's vision or what it is.
No,
Yeah,
I would disagree with you a bit, because I don't know it happened because of Ramanuja's vision. But certainly I know from the inscriptions that it happened uh, because of the vision or the efforts of the Sri Vaishnava community in those regions, And
how that liberal thinking came to Sri Vaishnavas? Is it not because of these Alvars and Ramanuja?
try to say, I'm not very sure that
No,
all
in
Sri Vaishnavas are so
Alvars
liberal
also, in
in their
Alvars
thinking.
also, there are many Alvars who have come from very societal thing, lower
Not
societal
many
strata.
as compared to the Nayanmars. Nayanmars, there are far more, not many. Nayanmars have a greater range of people coming from the marginalized sections
So we have to establish
than
how
the Alvars.
liberal thinking
Uh,
has come to Sri Vaishnava. From whom?
no, it is
We are
there
not
for
thinking of Ramanuja.
Shaivas also. I think these. I don't think they were thinking like this. The way you and I are thinking, they are not thinking in terms of a liberal thinking.
Madam,
I think they are actually looking. Yeah, sorry.
Madam,
Carry on. I'm so
just I intervene. There is a complementary question to what Lalitama Madam has asked. Why Dr.
yeah.
K. Guruswamy, how Ramanujacharya contribute to the upliftment of depressed class communities in socially and educationally through his Sri Vaishnavism philosophy and principle. So you could totally answer for both actually.
Okay. Now let me say, he went from temple to temple, from region to region. He, like I told you about Melkote, he had 52, who belonged to various sections of the society. He lived with the hunters. He has, then he shouted out the Dvaya mantra from the rooftop of the temple so that everybody could hear it. And, when his guru questioned him, he said that I don't care if I go to hell, because, that way I will go to hell, but the rest of them will receive salvation. So now, where do I see all this? Where do I read all this as a scholar? I don't read it in his works. I don't read it in his Sri Bhashya or Gita Bhashya or, Tatpatra Sangraha or whichever works he has written. They're not there. He is not engaging at all. In fact, those are very different works. Where do I see them? I see them in the narratives, in the Guru Paramparas. And I'm informed about this side of his personality only through the Guru Paramparas. So that is the textual part of it. Now, in practice, or in the practical realm, it is true that, in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century, Sri Vaishnava's social base had expanded tremendously. It had included people across various sections of the society. What you are looking at it as egalitarianism, I am a little suspicious of that, because I feel that it was done to increase the followers, to get patronage, to have greater, power. In fact, they became so, so popular and widespread in the Vijayanagara period. Krishnadeva Raya converted to Vaishnavism. We all know that. And in fact, the Sringeri Mutt had to commission biographies of Vidyaranya, which, where in those biographies there was a reminder, constant reminder to the Vijayanagar rulers that, look, Vidyaranya helped you to establish the Vijayanagar kingdom. We know those, those things. So don't forget us, So these anxieties are there. Now, it depends on how you approach history. I would like to know through the sources what they are trying to do. This is also a very useful thing, what you all are saying, is that how is Ramanuja, Sri Vaishnavism being received in the society? It is a very crucial aspect, But clearly, this is an uncomfortable question in the Sri Vaishnava community. After all, do not forget the split which happened in Sri Vaishnavism into Vadagalais and Tengalais. There is a Tamil tradition, you are right. There is a tradition of the Alvars, which is far more, broader in its outlook. But there's also a Sanskritic tradition, all right? And it is an uneasy question because there is a split in the community, and so I don't know whether, we can say this in a sweeping fashion. We have to actually look at it a little more closely as scholars amongst people. And why is it that, this kind of an image of Ramanuja, this kind of, of has endured even till day, that, you as scholars are also not questioning it. You feel that it would have been the case. I think it's important to see why this was happening, because there's a difference between his works and what has been said about him in the Guru Paramparas and in the temple inscriptions. That is what I would look at it. But of course, there are various ways to approach a question. Yeah.
I request Shivkumar Pavte to unmute himself and ask question. Pavte is teaching English literature in Government College, Yelahanka, Bengaluru. Please, Pavte.
Thank you, Pradeep. Madam, thanks a lot. It was really very enlightening and informative lecture. I have very simple questions as the time is running out. The first one is, can you throw some light on the responsible factors for the dichotomy in the Sri Vaishnavism philosophy as Vadagalai and Tengalai?
Okay. As I said, there was, at the time of Ramanuja, there were several parallel traditions existing. One was the Tamil tradition of the Alvars, which the hymns, the hymns were collected during the period of Alvars. The hymns are not collected, it is only after them that the hymns are collected and they are edited and compiled, into the Nalaira Divya Prabandham. And after that, epilogue is added, which is Ramanuja Nutrandadi, which is praise to Ramanuja, sorry. Now, so there is a Tamil tradition, there is a Sanskrit Vedic tradition, to which the Acharyas belong to, all right. And and of course, there is the Agamic tradition, and there is, of course, the legacy of the Sangama tradition. Now, you see, all of them are interacting with each other. What the Sri Vaishnava Acharyas do, and I'm sure this would include also Ramanuja, they are engaging with all these traditions, all right. And in the Guru Paramparas, all these traditions are being brought together. If the Guru Paramparas that I'm talking about, are actually texts barring, Prapanna Amrit, not barring Yatiraja Vaibhavam and Yatindra Pravanna Prabhavam, are actually texts which are talking about the entire community. So I have only spoken about the section on Ramanuja. There are sections on, on the Alvars also, long chapters on Alvars. Okay, I'm only talking about the section on Ramanuja. Divyasuri Charitam ends with Ramanuja, whereas Araira and Muaira Padi go after Ramanuja also. Okay, now the thing is that this kind of a Tamil Sanskrit tradition had existed, and let us not forget that all the Acharyas of Sri Vaishnavas, unlike Shaivism, are Brahmins. All right. The Mathadipatis are all Brahmins. They are not non-Brahmins, which is the case of Shaivism, okay, of the Shaiva tradition. And do not forget that all these Mathadipatis, including the story of Ramanuja, tells us that when they entered the Matha, they did not give up their sacred thread. They did not. That sacred thread they continued to wear. They did not give it up, which shows that they were very, very assertive and strong about their Brahminical identity. All right. So clearly, this tension is inbuilt right through. It's not that it is disappearing. So there is a tension about whether Sanskrit Vedas should be given more importance or the Tamil Vedas. That is the hymns of the Alvars. All right. So clearly this would have different kinds of people. You would have people who believe that Sanskrit Vedas should be given more importance, and those who believe that it should not be. And then there are other factors also which are coming in, that whether Shudras should be allowed to participate in all rituals or not, or whether Shudras should be allowed to participate. And you must remember, a large number of these warrior lineages, these Naikas, were also non-Brahmins. They did not belong to very high castes either, but they were very powerful politically. So these kind of discussions, the caste question has been a very uneasy question amongst the Srivaishnavas. But that's one part of it. Now, what happens is that, these tensions are constantly being shown. It is somehow in the 18th century that, we find these two groups emerge very strongly, one as Vadagalai and the other as Tengalai. The Vadagalais are, of course, literally speaking northerners, basically from the northern part. We should not think it is North India. I think it is northern part of Tamil Nadu, Kanchipuram, that area. And they are supposed to be more Vedic in their approach. They give emphasis to the Vedas. In their processions, the Vedic singers lead the procession, and the singers of the Tamil hymns are at the back, at the fag end. Then there are Tengalais. Tengalais means southern part, which, and Srirangam is, taken as that, their headquarters. And, they, of course, the Tamil hymnists lead the procession, and the Vedic, or the Vedangas, are at the back. So these are the kind of differences. There have been various kinds of differences. There have been differences over namams, everything. Now, in the 18th century, why these differences become very strong is that because when the East India Company and the British come, they take over all the temples, and very reluctantly, because initially they were not keen to get into the religious matters. Now, they could not understand that how can temple be such a strong administrative institution when it should be just a religious institution. It cannot perform administration. It cannot have land and take taxes, build other kinds, and indulge or involve itself in secular activities. By secular, I mean non-religious activities. They were not in favor of the temples and the mathas, and the Mathadipatis and the Acharyas being so powerful that these people are dominating the people's everyday lives, which they were. And it is then that they gradually started interfering, and because they wanted the power, they wanted to take over the temple, and they started reducing through series of administrative measures. There are these religious endowment boards, etc. Arjun Appaidurai has written very well on this, and so have some others. They started reducing the power of these acharyas, and it is at that moment, in order to benefit from this kind of a context, that wherever possible, the Vadagalais asserted themselves and, and became close to the British. Wherever possible, the Tengalais asserted themselves and became close to the British. So you'll find some temples as Vadagalai temples and some temples as Tengalai temples, where, particularly in Srirangam, where the issue was not clear, there were battles. In Kanchipuram, there were wars and battles between the Vadagalai and the Tengalais. There has been such strong, bitter disputes that it has gone to the Privy Council in London also. Over a namam on the elephant, whether it is a Vadagalai or a Tengalai thing. So actually, depending on the context, these differences have became very strong. They were not so strong. They were there, but they were not so strong in the Vijayanagar period. They were there, but they became extremely strong during the British period. In fact, there was a time when the Vadagalais and the Tengalais didn't even marry with each other. They didn't even intermarry. And now, those differences are hardly there. If you talk to an Iyengar or a Srivaishnava, they'll laugh it off. They'll say, oh, this is really funny and old. So I very briefly told you this difference, but what I'm saying is that there has been an uneasy amalgamation of the Sanskrit and the Tamil tradition in the Sri Vaishnava community. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Professor. Okay, Professor Dattatreya from Coimbatore University is teaching English literature there. Please, Dattatreya, unmute yourself and ask question, please.
Yeah. This is a question to Ranjeeta. See, when you were making these classifications of Vadagalais and Tenkalais, I remember reading an article by one European scholar long time back, who has done some interesting work, which is there in that book by David Lorenzen. That very famous book which he wrote long time back. I think it published in the early 90s or so, on ancient India, where this particular scholar makes a very clear distinction as to how these Sri Vaishnavas, particularly the followers of Ramanujacharya, belonging to Shudra and Brahmin sects. Okay, Shudra and Brahmin sects tend to toe these lines. One headed by, I think, if I remember that, because I tried to trace that article in my library, I couldn't lay my hand right now. Lokanatha Pillai, one important, long time back I read them, I think the surname Pillai, I'm very sure. I think it is Lokanatha Pillai. And there was one Dikshitar, who important followers of Ramanujacharya, who actually engineered some sort of an ideological differences between the way Ramanujacharya should to be understood, his work, what we today call as Tenkalai and Vadagalai. Okay, can you probably, in case you have come across any of the evidences, historical evidences, throw some light on it?
Yes, there is. If you read the works of Vedanta Deshika and you read the work and compare it with Pillai Lokacharya and Manaval Mamuni, there is a difference in the interpretations. There's no doubt about it. There is a difference in the way the interpretation, between Ramanuja of Ramanuja's teachings have taken place. Because actually, I'm glad you pointed this out, because when I was explaining, about this difference, I was doing it more historically and less philosophically. But it is true that, it's over the teachings of interpretation of the teachings of Ramanuja, over the interpretation of his works, that this kind of a conflict had emerged. But what is very important is that this conflict did not become so bitter and so evident in the medieval period as it became in the colonial period. And that is because the historical context kept changing. Because the way in which the British functioned with the temples and the Vijayanagar rulers did, who practically did not interfere. There has been I don't remember any exact points right now, but one battle or one point of serious conflict has been over prapatti and bhakti. The Vadagalais, there is that cat and monkey comparison which is constantly given. I don't know whom you're talking about. Is it Patricia Mume or Robert Lester? Because they are the ones who have worked with the split. Or there could be someone else, whom I also cannot recollect. The thing is that, according to the Vadagalais, you can get salvation, only with the help of a guru. Just like, with the help of a guru I'm getting confused. Yeah, it's actually very confusing, the differences. The Vadagalais say that you have to get salvation on yourself. You cannot, and there is no mediator, there is no guru in between. You have to do it yourself. Like a cat, or let us say a kitten, clutches the back of her mother, when she is, kind of going with her mother. So the effort has to be made on the part of the devotee. Now, what is the interpretation of this? The interpretation is that to achieve salvation, there are certain rituals which have to be followed. There are certain mantras which have to be recited, which are in Sanskrit, and not everybody will have access to it. All right. So clearly this becomes a little more conservative, in the view. Whereas Tengalais believe that no, there is no need for you to do it yourself. The Guru is there. He'll help you out. He's there for every problem of yours. He'll help you how to, achieve salvation or Sharnagati or Prapatti. Just like the monkey carries its calf, by itself. So this cat and monkey comparison is constantly given. This was one area where there was a massive, difference of interpretation, and both sides quoted Ramanuja's views on Sharnagati and Prapatti in their own way. So this is one, I remember now, this is one area where this kind of writings have taken place over Sharnagati and Prapatti. The rest, there are several, now. Yeah.
One more thing I would like to add is the North-South division that you're talking about was the division centered on, I presume it is centered on River Kaveri. So anyone who is to the northern side of River Kaveri, that, and southern side of River Kaveri. When you talk about the North-South division in the Tenkalais and the Vadagalais, I think Kaveri was a very important demarcator of this particular division.
Actually, north means north of Srirangam. Actually, Vadagalai means north of Srirangam. True, you're right. You're very right. Kaveri is an important demarcation because Srirangam is there. And Srirangam is the most important temple for the Srivaishnavas. It emerges as, if we can use the word, headquarters. And why that is happening is also, it has a history. In fact, my current project is actually on working on the town of Srirangam, so I'm actually doing that. But the Alvars also spoke a lot on Srirangam, and why is something, maybe because it's very fertile, it has a lot of potential. The Cholas focused a lot in the Kaveri regions because the Alvars' sacred geography actually followed the political geography. They primarily sang of those places as sacred centers, which were at the heart of the political geography. So could be that. There are various reasons, but Srirangam was the center of the Sri Vaishnava, community.
There's another thing that I would like to add. There's a lot of non-Brahmins. Generally, if you look at the Sri Vaishnava Iyengars of Hassan district, who are popularly known as bakery Iyengars. Okay, they're also known as Keelnata Iyengars. So Keelnata is essentially means lower laying land, but also the Madras Iyengars and the Triplicana Iyengars always claiming superiority over the Keelnata Iyengars. There is this very clear division. And there is also some oral narratives and oral, anecdotes and historical records which we access in Mysore region.
Yeah, true, very true. Because
where the untouchable communities residing around Melkote have been converted. Even now, there are some ritual where they have access for 1 or 2 days into the temple where they can go and perform some rituals. So there are a lot of non-Brahmin conversion which has happened, particularly in Karnataka region.
Yeah, of course.
So do you have any records about it? Or any evidence?
Yes, if you look at the temple records, they are constantly talking about various non-Brahmins coming in. There are a lot of them are mentioned as Shatada Mudalis, Ekangis. Shatada Mudalis are those who don't wear the thread, Ekangis, and so on and so forth. My disagreement, I won't say disagreement, but my tentativeness is about the fact that whether it is because of Ramanuja or whether it is because of the Sri Vaishnavas who followed Ramanuja. That is a difference where we need to make, and the thing is that the Sri Vaishnavas who follow Ramanuja will naturally attribute it to Ramanuja because he is their guru. He is a very important figure. Even in his own times, he was a very popular figure as a philosopher. So that is where I sort of make a distinction, that I will not blindly say it is Ramanuja. I will have to examine, it has to be examined case by case, So the question that arises is whether it is him only or it is the Sri Vaishnavas after him, that is the thing which we have to study. And whether this kind of a openness or of the Sri Vaishnava faith that we are all talking about, is it because they were progressive really, or there were other reasons of patronage, of having a large follower. Everybody wants that, and let us not forget that if we compare the religious scenario, actually Sri Vaishnavas in southern India still remain quite conservative compared to the Shaivas, to the Lingayats, and other communities. This is my reading of it, So interestingly, in northern India, Vaishnavism is supposed to be a very, very progress. It's supposed to be something which actually denounce caste. Kabir and all are all incorporated as a part of the Vaishnava pantheon. So this is very complex. That is what I'm trying to say. We cannot have a one size fit all interpretation.
Yeah, almost.
One more question I have.
Okay. Shukumar, make it very short and please.
Madam, in the 18th century Kannada work written by Devachandra's Rajavali Katha, it is mentioned that Melukote Chalvanarayana temple was originally a Jaina temple, and when King Vishnuvardhana got converted, it was also converted into Vaishnava temple. Is it true? Is there any epigraphical evidences?
No, there is no epigraphical evidence, but you see, these stories are very prevailing. The Venkateshwara temple at Venkateshwara Swami temple at Tirupati was supposed to be, a Shaiva temple. Before that, it was supposed to be a Buddhist shrine. And what is said is that the temple is on the hill. So a large number of Shaiva temples are on the hill, the Kurinchi region. These kind of interpretations are given. In fact, in the Tirupati, it is very obvious that it was probably, because Ramanuja had to assert himself. There was a quarrel which was going on, which is not shown here in the case of the Narayan Swami temple. But no, it is not. Epigraphical evidence does not point towards any kind of a change in the religious affiliation of the Narayan Swami temple. But clearly, this was a temple which was in disuse, because the story hints or tells us directly about Ramanuja trying to establish, the worship out there. That is very clear. But it also tells us that, the God is coming in his dream, Vishnu, and saying, I'm there, please find me, I'm below the anthill, things like that. But there is no epigraphical evidence which actually establishes that it was a Jaina temple. But we must remember that this area had a huge Jaina population. All right. So, probably there were some associations. Again, as I said, in case of history, we often have to go into probably, might be, could be, these kind of epithets. All right. Yeah.
There is a small question from Sunkam Govardhan. Did you accept Ramanuja leave Srirangam because of Chola king? Why? Because he came to throne of Srirangam Matha at the age of 32. He came to Karnataka at the age of 79. Due to his 47 years in Srirangam, is there any reference of quarrel between Shaivas and Srivaishnavas in Tamil Nadu?
Yes, there are quarrels. There are references to quarrels between the Sri Vaishnavas and the Shaivas. Jambukeshwaram temple is just across, Kaveri, and there are quarrels between the two. And Ramanuja's quarrels are there with the Shaivas, but they are not as many as they are within the community. All right. So we cannot rule out the quarrel between the two. But whether the Chola kings were biased enough to persecute Ramanuja to the extent of, gunning for his life, I'm not very sure about it, because Cholas have also patronized a large number of Vaishnava temples. They have, Kulothonga and all, they have actually patronized Vaishnava temples. It's not that. So one cannot establish a direct connection. However, we must remember that Cholas were Shaivas, all right? So they have patronized definitely Shaiva temples more and more generously than the Vaishnava temples. There is no doubt about that, okay? But whether they were persecuting Vaishnavas is something I'm not very sure of, okay? So the story of persecution, one is not very sure of. But yes, there was a negligence, if I have to use the word. So, these stories of persecution, exodus, they give a lot of respectability, and because at the end of the story of persecution and exodus, you don't fade away. You are supposed to emerge victorious, over everybody. So it's also, and you must remember that these stories are just not stories about the person himself. These stories carry meanings for your followers. If I am in distress, because I'm in a particular place, I'm not liking it, then I will, I'll take inspiration from a story like this, that, okay, Ramanuja also faced it. How did he, sort of, work it out? Like you have Prophet Muhammad's story, that, how he had to leave, he had to flee from Mecca to Medina because he was facing so much of opposition and persecution there. So these are some common tropes which you'll find about all important religious leaders. And they have a certain inspiration behind it. We should not completely disregard the aspect of faith, while we are analyzing, history. Yeah.
I'm taking the last question of this session. This question resembles the earlier question of Dr. S.K. Aruni,
Yeah.
which is like this: Shetter's study of pre-Ramanuja Srivaishnava settlements in southern Karnataka, and his question whether Ramanuja came to Karnataka to seek royal patronage or with the assurance of getting support of the Vaishnavas who already settled here.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
No,
a question.
I'm afraid I haven't seen this work of Professor Shettar. In fact, I've read his work on death, etc., but I'm afraid I haven't seen. In fact, I would like to have the reference. I'll definitely check for it.
Okay,
So,
this is a question from Professor Ashok Shettar. He's a retired history professor of Karnataka University, Darpana.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
almost we have taken the questions, and we are winding up this session. And I'm personally and collectively expressing, especially my gratitude and thanks to Ranjeeta Datta, especially for Bengaluru Historian Society. For especially Dr. S.K. Aruni, who is representing, and Itihasa Darpana, S.K. Itihasa Darpana, and then another forum, H.G. Rajesh is representing, and Rutumana.com, it is represented by Nitish Kuntadi. And I also present my thanks and gratitude to Ranjeeta on behalf of the august audience, and especially the audience who made a wonderful Q&A, who made the wonderful Q&A as the beautiful possibility. So again, once again, I express my thanks and gratitude to Professor Ranjeeta Datta, and I hope there will be more sessions and more conversations and this kind of discursive in a dialogue between various disciplines and Ramanuja, especially in Karnataka in future and upcoming days. So once again, I thank you on behalf of everybody. I express my gratitude to Professor Ranjeeta Datta. Many, many thanks, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all of you for, for this, extensive question and answer. Actually, I figured out that you have taken, what I have said also very seriously, which is very good for me. It's encouraging for me. And I'll definitely work on areas where, where you have actually kind of, drawn my attention to. So thank you so much. And thank you, Professor Aruni, Dr. Pradeep, the Bengaluru Historical Society, Itihasa Darpana, and Rudumu. I mean, it was really a very good experience for me, because I have to say that in our country, when we all do our PhDs and we do our research, we usually like to focus on areas to which we belong to. I'm a Bengali who was brought up in Delhi, and I took the challenge of working on South India in medieval period, because I was always told in the 90s when I was a student that no one works on South India. And I think they are right. And there is so much of, misrepresentation, misunderstanding. If you look at the larger history of India, South gets left out, or it gets sort of, not that kind of a prominence, or it is just taken as an exception. So my teachers, had always kind of, they said it in the class, I guess, because they were trying to make a point, but there were three of us who took it very seriously. and I continued with it. The other two withdrew. And it's been a very long journey because I had to learn Tamil, I had to learn Sanskrit, and till day I have to say that it's not that I know them very well, but I try my best, So thank you so much, and it's very nice to interact with the audience like you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. I hope there will be, more physical sessions and your physical appearance in Bengaluru or in across Karnataka, and that would help to converse more and engage in the epistemology of Ramanuja and Srivaishnava tradition or sect in Karnataka. So I wish everybody a good evening, and I'll wind up the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Okay.